My name is Samuel Singer, and while I usually introduce myself as a small-town reporter for the Habitsville Gazette, or the guy who has narrowly avoided all sorts of slow and agonizing deaths, today I bear a title that's far more chilling than anything I've ever faced before. Today, I'm a babysitter. My niece is in town staying with me while my sister and her husband take the first vacation that they've had since Ellie was born 5 years ago. And since I live, work, eat, and watch mindless TV alone, I was kind of excited to have some company. Even if that company is 5 years old and not much of a conversationalist. So there we were, in my apartment's living room watching something called Teddy's Big Day, which, as far as I could tell, was a program devoted to showing a large cartoon bear walking through a grocery store and making smart food decisions. Ellie was sitting on the floor in front of me, eyes glued to the screen, and eating every bit of it up. Sure, I didn't love the show, and sure, Ellie's hands had red SpaghettiOs sauce that she was getting into the carpet, but it wasn't a half-bad way to spend a Saturday morning in Habitsville. "This a good episode, Elle?" I asked. The kid was far too engrossed in Teddy's activities in the checkout line to answer. She sat haunched, rocking back and forth ever so slightly, definitely too close to the screen for her health. I leaned forward to pick up my cup of coffee from the living room table. I had tried to clean up for Ellie, not that she'd noticed as long as the TV stayed on, but I still had a bit of debris littered about my place. The mug left a ring of brown on a missing poster from my neighbor's cat, an orange tabby, unfortunately named Mr. Fluff, that I meant to try to keep an eye out for. But as my grip closed around the mug handle, I felt something strange. It was an odd sort of pressure, as though my finger was swollen. Sure, there was a bit of salt in SpaghettiOs, but this seemed weird, so I put down my coffee and examined my hand. What I saw was oddly simple. Entirely inexplicable. It was a thin red thread tied around my right pointer finger, a small bow just above the knuckle. Needless to say, I didn't put it there. I held it up to the little girl on the carpet. "Ellie, did you tie this around my finger when I wasn't looking?" She didn't even look. The bear was loading the groceries into a station wagon, but of course it wasn't her. My niece couldn't have even tied her own shoes, let alone some sort of sleight of hand trick. The knot came undone with a gentle pull. I examined the thread, but it seemed ordinary. I let it fall to the floor and tried to stop thinking about it, but of course, I couldn't. I recalled some sort of old wives' tale or something I'd seen on television. A person might tie a red thread around their finger to remind them of something they're afraid they'll forget. And though I had no recollection of tying the thread on my own finger, something about this idea struck me. I found myself trying to run through anything I might have forgotten that morning. It was when I tried mentally retracing my steps that I heard it. It was a strange sort of high-pitched buzzing. First, I thought it was something on the television. Maybe the bear had bought a can opener. But as it droned louder and even higher, I realized something. I have one deaf ear that on any ordinary day doesn't hear a single thing. And yet it picked up this sound perfectly. On the same level as my working one. That was when the sound began to feel wholly unnatural. "Do you hear that, Elle?" I asked. My niece still didn't answer, her attention still glued on the screen. I looked around. My apartment seemed as normal as it had ever been. Still, the noise grew, and I got up to see if I could find the source. "I'll be right back," I said, and ventured towards the kitchen. The squealing was so strong in the kitchen it actually made me wince. I checked the fridge, the appliances, but even though the sound was sort of mechanical, it didn't seem to have an electrical source. The sound was rising even more as I checked the cabinets, at such a volume that my eyes began to water, and I opened the pantry with blurred vision. The screeching rose a few decibels as I opened the pantry door, and I tried to scan the contents for something that could emit such a sound. That was when I saw something. Something that filled me with a cold sense of horror and dread, the sense of which was only drowned out by the screeching that grew even louder. So loud I pressed my hands hard against either side of my aching head, my eyes shut tight. "That's right, Teddy!" I was so relieved I could have cried. The sound had ended. Not in a slow fade, but rather a sharp silence like a speaker cord being cut. The quiet felt so blissful that I actually smiled. And then I saw where I was. Though I had just been standing, a hand on Ellie's shoulder, half turned towards the door, I now found myself seated on the sofa. Ellie was still frozen in front of the screen. All was as it had been before I had heard the sound, except for two things. One was that Teddy had made it out of the supermarket and was now loading groceries into his car. The second was a strange sensation around my ears. It was an odd sort of warmth and coldness, and as I brought my hand to my head, my fingers came away bloody. I quickly felt around the other side, and that hand had returned trembling and scarlet, so the sound had happened. I hadn't dozed off into a nightmare, and it really had been loud enough to make my ears bleed. And I suppose to make me black out while I found my way back onto the couch? "Are you okay, Elle?" I asked. I could see that her ears, under her pigtails, were fine, and her pink shirt was unstained. I picked up a napkin, already red from SpaghettiOs, and started dabbing at the blood in my head and neck. I was in somewhat of a daze, trying to understand what the hell had happened. Elle seemed to not have noticed anything, and I was beginning to fear that I had some sort of stroke or brain aneurysm. But then I felt it. An uncomfortable snugness on my left pointer finger, which had grown sticky with half-dried blood. I spat on the tattered napkin and wiped, and as soon as the red of the blood had been scraped away, something else crimson remained. A thread tied in a neat little bow around my finger. My mouth tasted of rust and my stomach felt sour as I stared at the string. The glow of the television flickered just behind it. There was only one meaning that felt right, even if it didn't make sense. I was forgetting something. "Elle, we need to go," I said, the deep instinctual desire to flee taking root in a deep pit forming in my chest. She still wasn't answering. Teddy the bear was now helping his neighbor. An elderly pigeon crossed the road. I leaned forward to shake Ellie's shoulder, break her from the trance the children's show had on her, or else to just pick her up and escape whatever was happening inside my apartment. The moment I shifted my weight towards my niece, it started again. That terrible droning. My panic rose with the volume, but still, I reached for my niece. Even if the sound killed me or drove me mad, I wasn't going to let the same thing happen to her. A hand touched her shoulder. A shoulder that was warm. Far too warm. Her skin wasn't still, but it didn't pulse with blood coursing through her veins. It was vibrating slightly, like there was a deep whirring somewhere under her skin that was generating a heat. Like when I left my laptop on a blanket for too long. When I made that contact with Ellie, the noise became literally ear-splitting, and I felt a warm trick make its way from the side of my head down my neck. Still, I turned her towards me and prepared to take her and run. I pulled her away from the television, opened my mouth to shout over the din, but when I looked into the little girl's face, I stopped cold. There was a sight there. One so terrible it shook me to my very core. It was the worst sight I'd ever seen, and the sound screamed in my head. I shut my eyes tight. "Way to go, Teddy!" I blinked. It was quiet. My heart was still hammering in my chest from the horror that I'd seen just a moment before, and yet the sight before me was a familiar and mundane one. I was sitting on the couch. Teddy the bear was on the television learning Basic Addition from a cartoon rabbit, and my niece, Ellie, was seated on the floor, her back to me. Only there was something not right about all this. I could remember the feeling of being scared, but when I tried to remember what of, there was nothing. I grabbed Ellie's shoulder, turning her around, and now here I was. My hands were sticky scarlet. I could recall the sound, the pain. The 2 times before I had found myself back on this couch without a memory of sitting down, and yet that last sight, as well as whatever I had seen inside the pantry, had been wiped from my memory. My breathing was shallow with fear, and this time I didn't call out to Ellie. Instead, I slowly and quietly looked down at my hand. Right at the center of my left pointer finger, just above the knuckle, there it was, a red thread tied into a neat bow. I was forgetting something. I was frozen in my seat. I didn't dare move, in case the sound started up again, and I found myself waking up to the same cursed sight. I was racking my brain, trying to remember what I had seen. It was just there in the corner of my mind, but it was just out of reach. Teddy was on the screen again, eating lunch. It was a sandwich. I couldn't stay there forever. I risked some movement, inching across the sofa cushion. As I did, I could almost see Ellie's face, the last thing I remembered looking at before I found myself on the couch again. As I shuffled, terrified of giving myself away to whatever mysterious force was making the screech, the glow of Teddy's big day making my stomach turn, I had a curious thought. It wasn't just what I had seen when I had turned Ellie towards me and that I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember what Ellie looked like at all. Sure, I knew the back of her head. I'd been staring at it all morning. I knew she had her hair in pigtails, that she had a pink shirt. But her face was nowhere in my memory. My heart beat faster with fear. The sound had made me black out the moment I got into the couch every time. But I didn't think it could be taking more memories from me. I stopped moving on the couch. It wasn't just that I couldn't remember Ellie's face this morning. I couldn't remember it from last night either. In fact, I couldn't recall the moment she arrived at my apartment, my sister dropping her off, tucking her in, none of it. Like it never happened. It was then, on the edge of the sofa, the instant that I could make out the front of Ellie's face, that I remembered what I had seen in the pantry. It had been 2 untouched cans of SpaghettiOs, and the mangled remains of something small and meaty, all that was left of which was bits of fat and splintered bone. A few tufts of orange fur stuck to a collar that read Mr. Fluff, sticky from blood, thick and red as tomato sauce. The sound struck me for only a moment, and then I was gone. "Good night, Teddy." I was sitting in the center of the couch. On the screen, a bird with a monocle was tucking Teddy into bed. The moon grinning outside his window. I could feel the thread around my finger without even looking at it. The shape of Ellie sat in front of me, attention wrapped on the screen. Until the moment Teddy's light went out. Then, without anyone touching the remote, the TV went black. I sat in terrified silence as the creature stayed on the floor. Then, as my heart hammered in my aching ears, the shape slowly stood and turned to face me. It looked like a little girl in every way, but one. The face. There, framed by dark pigtails and connected to an ordinary neck, was a concave circle of metal. It bit deep into the creature's skull, as though the original content had been scooped out, and a chunk of machinery was installed. The circle in the center was webbed and soft, and after a moment I recognized what it was. A speaker. I sat and I stared into the metal shape as it seemed to stare back. Then, as though speaking, it whirred slightly, the smallest hint of the metallic scream that had made my ears bleed playing through, making me wince. And then, with a sound like a record scratch, a new sound came out. "Hi, boys and girls, it's time for Teddy's big day!" The rest of the audio from the episode continued to play back as the creature faced me. At one point in the recording, there was some meowing that made it difficult to hear some of the dialogue, but after a sharp, animalistic scream, it was gone. I could hear myself becoming increasingly panicked, and then silenced. And over the course of half an hour, I was forced to relive the previous confusing, terrifying minutes of my existence. It was somewhere in that replay that a single terrifying thought was allowed to enter my mind. I don't have a niece. And then the recording ended. The creature went silent. We looked at one another, or rather, I stared into the webbing of the speaker, and then, clumsily, as though its head was very heavy, it began to walk. It tottered across my apartment floor towards the door. It reached upwards with much effort, turned the handle with little chubby-fingered hands, and walked out. I didn't move. I couldn't. My head and ears ached, and I was dizzy, and I could only stare at my reflection in the black screen of my television, sweating and nauseous. And then I saw something on the carpet, right where the creature had been sitting. There were two objects. One, a pair of children's safety scissors. And two, a small spool of scarlet thread. My grandmother has been catatonic for the last 5 years. On the night that Grandpa died, her neighbors called the police to come check on her. They said that she was screaming loud enough to be heard 3 houses down. And when the paramedics arrived, she had ruptured something in her throat. Grandpa was dead in the bed they shared. It was a heart attack. And as they zipped Grandpa into the black bag that would take him to the morgue, they carried Grandma out in a stretcher. After that, she wouldn't speak. She wouldn't move. She just lay in bed and stared at the ceiling of her room in the Shady Lane nursing home. My grandma always was a strong lady. She was fed mechanically. She wears diapers that an orderly has to change. The physical exercise she gets comes in the form of a physical therapist, moving her legs for her as she lays in bed. If she leaves the room, it's because Denise or Reggie, the only 2 orderlies who seem to give a crap about the residents, lift her into her wheelchair and take her outside or to the resource room, which is really just a fancy word for the TV room. I begin my story this way so that you'll know how weird today's events were. I'm a 35-year-old father of 2. I've been married since I was 27 to the love of my life. I thought that after 8 years of marriage and raising children, nothing could get to me like it did today. I'm sitting at my computer with a bottle of scotch by my elbow and a sinking fear of returning to my marriage bed. It all started when I went to go visit my grandma today. So my family has a system. Mom and Dad go to visit Grandma on Monday. I go to visit on Wednesday. My little sister Lisa goes on Friday, and we all go to visit on Sunday after church. My wife doesn't go every time, but she comes with me sometimes. She's known Grandma since we were 17, and she remembers her before her current condition. She wasn't particularly close with Grandma, but I think that she likes to be there for me. My grandma and I have always been close. I love my grandma, and I don't want to waste the time I might have left with her, whether she knows I'm there or not. It's a thought that counts. Or that much. I went on my lunch break today to see her. Reggie was there when I came in, and he gave me a big smile as he finished fussing with her pillows. "It always warms my heart to see you and your sister coming to visit your old Gram," he said. He let me know how her vitals were, told me about the doctor visit that she'd had last week, and then he said that he'd leave us to our visit. Just me and my grandma. I took out my lunch, made some one-sided small talk as I ate. I read somewhere that coma patients are aware that someone's talking to them, and in some cases, it sometimes helped them come out of their coma. My grandma wasn't in a coma, no one really knew what was going on with Grandma, but I like to think that maybe one day she'd come out of it and thank me for all the lovely visits. She'd say that it was my voice that had kept her going all these years. Pretty sure my sister just played on her phone the whole time that she was here. And I'd feel like I had helped Grandma in some way while she was going through this troubled time. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. I was just telling Grandma about a client I had helped at work when she suddenly inhaled sharply and exhaled in a rattling skeletal way. I paused, my hand still holding hers as it usually did. I was about to get Reggie, and suddenly the hand tightened spasmodically. She made another of those rattling breaths, her eyes rolling wildly. She was like a frightened horse looking for an escape. And though it was the middle of the day, I felt a cold chill run through me as she shuddered and gasped in pure terror. "His hands," she breathed out. "The hands of the dead." I pulled back suddenly, letting go of her clenched hand. "Grandma, are you Listen to me, I don't have much time, Bug." She was awake. Her face was pale and thin, her hands little more than fleshy claws, but she was awake. She was looking at me in that way that people look at fire exits in an inferno, and I tried to get up. She reached out again and took my hand in her cold, damp embrace. I wanted to get Reggie. Reggie would know what to do, but the naked want on her face held me in place. I knew I wasn't going anywhere. She'd called me Bug. That had always been her nickname for me, and when she said it, I realized how much I wanted to hear her say it again. "Please, Bug, I need to tell you what he said. You need to know," she said frantically, almost pleading, and my knees set me down without thinking. This is what she told me. They had been in bed together when it happened. Both were at that advanced age where laying together was just that. The two were in bed sleeping, just being with each other, when Granddad's shuddering had woken her up. His arms had been around her, and her back had been against his front. I know from familiarity that this was how they'd always slept, since they were married at 17. The position was as natural as sleep itself. His shuddering had woken her up. His hands were grasping at me. His fingers were together like a pair of mittens, and he was opening and closing like slow, pained machines. His mouth was against my ear, and his breath was raspy and panting. He sounded like he'd been running, and as he bucked around, I knew he must have been having a heart attack. Your granddad's health hadn't been good for a while, but as I tried to break free of his arms, he held me tight, leaned his mouth in close. "No, Ellie, don't go, please. I'm scared, Ellie, I'm scared," he said. And God help me, he sounded terrified. "Don't be scared, Roy," I told him. "You'll be okay. I'll call Dr. Stevens and he'll—" "I can't see, Ellie." That's what he said to me. "I can't see, Ellie. They say you see the light or you hear a voice, but I can't see, Ellie. It's all black. It's all just black, and I can't see his face or hear his voice." He gripped me then hard. I felt his nails through my nightshirt, and as he did it, his heart attack was bad. I was terrified that he wouldn't come through this time. I tried to break free. I tried to get loose, but his arms were so rigid, I couldn't get away. The whole time he was just panting and telling me how there's nothing there, and it's all just black, and he knows. He knows there's nothing there. He kept right on repeating it, even as his voice went out, and then he leaned in close until his lips were on my ear, and he breathed one final time. That was the first time I screamed. I screamed because I was in the arms of a dead man. He was gone, Bug. He breathed his last breath, and that was that, but now I was caught in his last embrace. Her voice took on a tenuous, hysterical sound, and I remember thinking that somewhere a machine must be going off. Somewhere telemetry must be telling someone how her heart was racing along too fast. Someone somewhere must be on their way with a crash cart or a doctor or a shot to calm her down, because in this room she was so close to hysterics. I wanted to get that shot. As many times as I'd prayed to God to hear her speak again, I wanted to see that man come through the door with a shot so that she would slip back off again. As much as I wanted her back, I knew this was not okay. At that moment, I wanted her back in her catatonic state. I wanted this jittery, hysterical creature out of pain. I pulled at his hands, those strong hands that would take mine sometimes, and they were hands of stone. They'd locked in death, and now I couldn't separate them. His weight was a stone around me, and I was afraid, Bug. I was afraid I'd never get loose and they'd find us both dead right here. Him of a heart attack and me, a just of plain old starvation. Her voice broke, and when she closed her hurting green eyes, I saw the tears spill out. I had to break his fingers. They sounded like dry twigs when they crack in the fire, and after I'd broken 4 of them, I almost had his hands apart. That's when he came back, she whispered, as though he might hear her. Her words made my blood run cold. He'd been dead for 5 minutes, Bug. His chest was close enough. I could feel nothing beating, but all of a sudden, his arms tightened around me and he screamed into my ear like a wolf in a trap. He pulled me hard against him. I felt my ribs trying to break. And all of a sudden, he was bucking and thrashing like the devil himself had a hold of him. It burns, Ellie, he kept screaming it into my ear. And when I finally thrust his hands apart, I rolled out of bed. I got as far from it as I could, and that's where they found me, Bug. They found me in the corner. They found me screaming. I don't know what was burning him, but I saw his last few minutes before he went out again. He writhed, he screamed, he died in agony. What kind of place had he been in that would make him scream like that, I thought. What kind of place? What kind of place? What kind of place? She kept right on mumbling that phrase again and again and again until I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, I walked out as fast as I could, and I never looked back. I don't know what I'll do next time I have to see her. I didn't want to go back to work. I called my boss. I told him I wasn't feeling well. I needed to go home. And he let me. He's a good man, and when I called Reggie later that afternoon, he told me that she was right as rain, as usual. When he'd given her her meds that afternoon, she was still lying in bed, staring at the ceiling as always. He never hinted at any change in telemetry. Never said a word about abnormal vitals, just told me how much he knew it meant to her that I came and visited. And now I'm sitting in my computer. I don't know what to do. I've been sitting here for about an hour and contemplated how I'll get on with the rest of my life, knowing my grandfather's agony and my grandmother's terror at the end of his life. I've been contemplating how I'm going to climb in bed with my wife tonight, a problem that seems to be more here and now. I see the thought of her wrapping her arms around me, placing her chest against my back, making me want to shudder right out of my skin. What would I do if she woke me up in the throes of a heart attack? What would I do if she whispered those same hopeless words into my ear before she died? What would I do if I found myself trapped in the embrace of my own dying love? The woman who answered the door when I knocked had tears in her eyes. She clutched her house coat tighter around herself and took me in, looking me up and down. "Miss Burton, I'm Agent Barnes. May I come in, please?" She regarded me through the glass, staring coldly at my face. "They said you'd be coming. You're from the FBI? Some sort of special unit?" "That's right, ma'am," I said, pulling on my ID badge and showing it to her. After examining it for a while, she turned the handle, pausing to take a quick look. Hopefully look around the neighborhood before finally holding the creaking screen door open for me. I stepped up the wooden staircase and entered the house. The home was well kept. Old but comfortable furnishings, walls covered in framed photos showing barbecues and family gatherings, weddings, birthday parties. It looked like a peaceful place, not an abusive household or neglected one. I thought to myself. I took out my notepad and scribbled something illegible. I'm here to follow up on the case involving your son, Brian. Do you mind if we sit down to talk for a few minutes? She showed me into the living room and I took a seat on the couch. Can I get you anything, Agent? Barnes. No. I'm fine, thank you, though. Instead of sitting down opposite me, she chose to remain standing, making me feel oddly nervous. I tried to ignore the situation, but it did throw me off slightly. Most people sit down when you do, especially when they're the host. What exactly can I do for you? Well, I'm hoping to ask you a few questions about your son's disappearance. I understand that he went missing from his bedroom late one night and there was no signs of forced entry. The doors were still locked in the morning when you woke up, is that right? She nodded slowly. And this, despite the fact that he didn't have a key and none were missing from the home. She stood with her arms crossed, not saying anything. Was there a question in there somewhere, Agent Barnes? I waited for a beat. This wasn't how I expected it to go. Already I felt like my entire preconception of the case was wrong. My theories were immediately forgotten and I began to examine the whole situation with fresh eyes as I sat there looking into the woman's unreadable face. I suppose my question is, how did he go missing? Seems impossible, unless there's something that you aren't telling us, a door left open, a window, a neighbor with a copy of your keys, something. You have to try to remember. You're singing the same old song that the detective was singing. Nobody else had a key. None of the windows or the doors were unlocked. I'm sure about that. And you're sure he didn't sneak out after dinner to play with friends? No one would blame you if that was the case. Kids that age, they'll go out to the forest, they'll run around, they'll get in trouble. You're sure he was in his room that night when you went to bed? I'm sure. I tucked him in myself. I'm not a drunk or a druggie, Agent Barnes. I'm not a neglectful mother either. I didn't forget seeing my son in bed that night, just like I didn't forget to lock up. This was going nowhere, I could already tell. We were off to a bad start. I had a feeling that she would sense my newfound hesitancy and uncertainty. So I put my notepad away. I thought for a few seconds what direction to take. I had to improvise. Can you show me his room? I'd like to see it if I could. Her face showed no change of expression at the request. She just held her hand out, inviting me towards the back of the house. I followed her as she led me down a hallway with creaking wooden floors. Do you have children, Agent Barnes? Yeah, a son. How old is he, if you don't mind me asking? 11, actually. Same as your Brian. Good. Now imagine for a second what it would feel like if you had him taken from you in the night, despite doing everything possible to stop something like that from ever happening. I hate to think of it. That's a parent's worst nightmare. Here's his bedroom, she said, opening a door at the end of the hall on the left. It's just as he left it. I didn't change a thing. The room was painted a pale blue shade, and there was a small bed in the corner, a desk with a computer sitting atop of it, a gaming console, a small television on the far end with a beanbag chair in front of it. There were no signs of violence or disarray. Nothing looked out of place or broken. A few items of clothing and toys were scattered here and there, but overall it looked cleaner than my own son's room. Was there anything missing? Any of his belongings, clothes, toothbrush, phone? Brian doesn't have a phone. He kept begging me for one, but I told him he wasn't old enough. She broke off suddenly, her face screwing up into a grimace of sorrow. If I'd let him have a damn cell phone, maybe they could have traced it. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder and she let me do that, at least, without pulling away. Even if you had, he wouldn't have had it on him while he was sleeping. You can't blame yourself for that, I told her, feeling suddenly more and more on her side. And just so you know, my son doesn't have a cell phone either, I told her. I told him the same thing. The woman bit her lip, hugging herself tighter. She turned her eyes up to the ceiling, trying to dry the tears within them, as if she couldn't bear the thought of weeping 1 minute longer. Do you think Brian could have made a copy of your key, maybe without your knowledge? That just maybe he could have snuck out in the night and locked up afterwards? She shook her head rapidly. He's 11. And no, I told the officers he isn't like that. He's a good boy. I looked over to see the closet in the corner of the room was now hanging open, and just ever so slightly. But I distinctly remembered it being closed when I came into the room. Inside, it looked pitch black. For some reason, I was drawn towards that darkness, and I began to walk across the room towards the closet door. What I was looking for within that darkness, I wasn't sure, but it seemed important that I check inside. Brian told me something the night before he disappeared. He said there was a monster in his closet. I stopped dead in my tracks. And most children of 11 years old had grown out of seeing monsters in the shadows, hadn't they? At least my son had. He had grown out of that phase a long time ago, she said, as if reading my thoughts. But then, all of a sudden, that night, he told me there was a monster hiding in his closet, and he... You what? He actually wet the bed. He hadn't done that in a long time. I see. And so he came out here, he told you all that, and then what happened? I went back to his room with him right away. I turned the lights on, I opened the closet to show him there was nothing inside, just his clothes and a few old shoes, but he still wasn't convinced. He said the monster was very good at hiding, that it pretends to be shadows. Glancing back in the open closet door again, I started moving towards it once more, this time with my legs feeling more wobbly like jello. He washed up, and I changed his sheets, and he went back to bed. Brian wanted to stay up with me and watch television after that. He didn't want to go back to his room, but I made him go. What time was this around? 2 o'clock in the morning, and then he had to get up for school the next day, she said, then broke off sobbing once again. Opening the closet door, I peered inside. The darkness permeated the whole space like a thick, oily cloud of smoke. Far more black and terrifying than it should have been. As if the darkness were a living thing camouflaging itself there, pretending to be just a closet, just like the missing boy had claimed. I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts from my mind, but they persisted. Can you turn the light on any brighter than that? No, it's all the way up. Stupid light bulbs seem to get dimmer every day, even after I replaced it. I'll have to get an electrician over here one of these days. I pulled out my flashlight. I shone it into the dark space. The oily blackness retreated almost reluctantly, as if in a delayed reaction that shouldn't have been possible. I blinked my eyes twice, trying to decide if I was seeing things. My heart was suddenly hammering, and the palms of my hands were sweaty as I stared at the darkened space in the dim beam of my flashlight. It seemed to be malfunctioning, weak compared to its usual strength. I smacked it a few times and tried to remember when I'd last replaced the batteries. Can you feel that too? She asked from behind me nervously. I wanted to turn around and look at her, but was afraid to leave my back exposed to the darkness. I know it's crazy, but ever since that night, I can't help but feel like maybe he was right. Can you feel it? Something staring at you? She let out a nervous titter, which broke me out of my stunned silence. No, ma'am, I lied. Just looks like a regular bedroom closet to me. You feel like there's something in there looking at you? Not just me, at us. It's watching both of us. It's seeing your face, Agent Barnes. I don't think that's a good thing. What? How come you don't want to turn your back on it, Agent Barnes? You do feel it. I know you do. Close the door so it can't stare at us anymore, will you? I don't like that feeling. Not one bit. I pushed it with a shaking hand and felt the satisfying click of it closing. Suddenly, I could breathe again. We both left the room in a hurry, and I excused myself momentarily into the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize my own face staring back. There were bags beneath my eyes that hadn't been there before, and my skin looked yellow-gray. sallow and jaundiced. I felt sick to my stomach. Before I could do anything, the nausea overcame me. Getting down on my knees, I retched into the toilet bowl. Pure black bile like molasses poured out of me, sticky and tenacious like tar. It burned like acid as it came up from my stomach, coating my tongue afterwards and tasting oily and terrible. I rinsed out my mouth and flushed the toilet again and again to no avail. I stumbled out of the bedroom, drunk feeling and dizzy, but still wanting to finish my interview. I needed to at least try. She was waiting for me in the kitchen, standing by the sink. I stumbled into the room and I felt it spinning all around me. Clutching my head with both hands, I tried to force myself to see straight. Just a couple more questions, I said, covering my mouth so that she didn't see the black bile coating my tongue. My heart was pounding far too quickly, and I tried to ignore the fact that something was potentially very seriously wrong with me. Still, completely in denial of it at that point. You don't look well, Agent Barnes. You look gray in the face. Are you all right? Fine. Now, can you tell me about Brian's father? I understand he passed away several years ago. Did he have any family? Close friends? She shook her head at me, as if none of these questions mattered. And she was right. In a way, they didn't. The interview didn't lead anywhere, and I couldn't focus on anything that she said. Soon I was blackout on the street again. The memory of the end of the interview gone entirely from my mind. It was like I had been on autopilot without realizing it, and I didn't like that feeling, as if someone else had been driving the car and I had been asleep behind the wheel. I had a very strong suspicion that whatever had happened to Brian would not be a solvable crime. And if it was solvable, those findings would not be suitable for an official report. This had redacted written all over it, assuming it even made it up to the chain of command. If I told my superiors what I had just experienced, they wouldn't have believed a word of it. The case had gone cold months before, so it wasn't expected of me to solve it, only to try to lend a hand if I could. Most of the cases ended up remaining unsolved, so it wouldn't require much explanation if I wasn't able to do anything useful. I really didn't feel like I would be able to do anything useful. I had terrible brain fog for the rest of the trip, getting contemptuous looks from the local police detectives whenever I suggested anything that I thought might be useful. Everything had been tried before by the sounds of it, and began to feel as if I had overstayed my welcome. My flight back home was a red-eye. I tried to sleep through it, but found my dreams were plagued by nightmares. I kept dreaming I was a kid again, back in my childhood bedroom. Not only that, but my closet door kept squealing open in the night, creaking loudly, the wood swinging back and forth as if blown by an impossible wind. I stood up on my child legs to go over to it, but found myself frozen with fear, staring at the blackness within the closet. That deep, penetrating darkness which seemed to spread like flooding, overflowing water towards me, and then, as I reached out a trembling hand for the door handle to close it, something else reached out and grabbed my wrist. An ice-cold, gnarled hand, rotten and emaciated. The flesh was pale and bluish-purple, mottled and covered in wounds, seeping and oozing with blood and pus. As I tried desperately to pull away, fighting it with all of my strength, it pulled me deeper into the darkness. I fell in, plunging into the depths of it, suffocating in the dark abyss. And when I woke up, I was screaming, and the airplane had begun to descend. The flight attendants gave me a look which told me my terror was not appreciated. By the time I got home that night, it was already dark and well past Greg's bedtime. My wife was in bed, so I poured myself a drink, sat down on the couch to watch television for a little while, hoping to distract myself from the things I'd seen, and from the dreams I couldn't unsee. I wanted so badly to forget that dream, but it was the only thing I could visualize when I closed my eyes. That rotten corpse hand grabbing hold of my wrist and squeezing. I felt as if I could feel that pain even after I had awoken. That feeling of something tightening around my forearm like a freezing vice. I looked down at my arm to see a handprint there, slowly purple like an old bruise. It was fading like it was old, and yet Yet I hadn't seen it earlier. The hell? What's happening to me, I asked myself, standing up and pacing. There was cold beer in the fridge. Despite the time I went in there, I grabbed the bottle, popped it open, chugged its contents. Felt so thirsty all of a sudden, like I hadn't drank in days, but I didn't want water. The thought of it disgusted me. The bottle was empty, and so I grabbed another and another, draining them both. Soon I was on my fourth, and then it was empty. The rest of the six-pack was gone 2 minutes later, and I belched loud enough to wake the dead after I finished polishing it off. Still thirsty, I went to the cupboard. I pulled out an old, dusty bottle of Gibson's. I drank it straight down, the usual burn of it absent now. Instead, it just felt like heat in my belly afterwards. Suddenly very tired, I stumbled off to bed, but not before peeking into Greg's room to check on him. It was around 3 a.m. by that point. He was fast asleep and snoring, and his closet door was closed tightly. I made sure of that. When we woke up the next morning, Greg was gone. I had locked all the doors and windows, and Greg didn't have his own key. He didn't have a cell phone we could trace either, but I got the feeling that it wouldn't make a difference either way. The police came to investigate and were surprised to hear what I do for a living. They were even more surprised to hear about the case I had just been investigating. Think it might be a copycat? One of the detectives asked innocently. If only it could have been simple. Or maybe the same guy. You might be right, I said, unable to deny their logic. But I knew that wasn't what had happened. Not really. Let's take a look around his room, they said. And I led them down the hallway towards Greg's room, showing them inside. I left it exactly how it was. We didn't touch anything. The closet door swung open an inch, then stopped. It opened an inch wider and stopped again. Does the closet door always do that? The taller detective asked. No. Why don't you take a look? Since I was a little kid, my great-uncle Ivan has lived with us in our basement. He's a surrealist painter by trade, and his works are beautifully done, whimsical and thought-provoking oil masterpieces, worthy of being stared at for hours. Each time I look at one of his paintings, I find something new that I've never noticed before. Uncle Ivan is the most talented artist I have ever met. And yet, his work's not even known to the most obscure collectors. I wonder sometimes if he'll be like Van Gogh. Nobody will know properly of his genius until after he's gone. When he had a stroke and he lost the ability to speak, he began painting obsessively, showing the world the beauty in his mind which only otherwise would be lost without words. My parents built him a studio in the backyard for his 70th birthday. They had friends in construction, and we had a very large property in the country, so they built him a very big studio with high ceilings, knowing he would find a way to utilize every inch available. And utilize it he did. The walls were painted white with primer, and then he set himself to work. Inside this massive space, he created another world. Within a year, his designs were outlined in black and white, with splashes of color beginning to be applied in places. Already, the overall effect was astonishing. It was like entering the surreal space of his own mind, an Alice in Wonderland world that sparked the imagination and resembled the uncanny landscape of dreams long forgotten. It was when the colors were completely filled in that the illusion became complete. And one day I went outside to his workspace in the backyard to find that he had vanished. He was gone, and I could make no sense of it. "Uncle Ivan!" I called out in the empty, echoing studio. But he didn't answer. I gazed around in total wonderment at the huge room that he had painted once again. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, alive with colors and images. I tried to find a spot of black and white where he still had to fill in color, and could find none. The field of mushrooms with its gnome inhabitants were so real, it felt like I could step into it and join in the merriment of the fairy folk living there. purple cloud mountains rose up steeply to the left of that, a field of pink cherry blossom trees sloping downward on the other side towards a tumbling river, the color of cotton candy. This led into a sprawling desertscape, which started out in yellows, oranges, and golds, and faded softly into the greens and gentle blues of an ocean filled with kelp, octopus, jellyfish, and a myriad of other fascinating aquatic creatures. Gasping, I realized the room was finally complete, my heart thumping in my chest as I thought about what this meant. This had been my Uncle Ivan's life for the past several years, and now it was finished. He should have been reveling in his masterpiece. I thought he would have at least come to find me to show me that it was done. I mean, he knew I was his biggest fan, after all. Where was he? The man was a total recluse, a hermit. He never left the property no matter what, and often spent days straight in the studio, working on the all-encompassing mural. I walked around the fantastical space, becoming lost in the swirling colors, dreamlike images. Even the floors were painted, making it feel like you were completely immersed in this beautiful fantasy world that my uncle had made. The sound of birds chirping came from nearby, and I looked up, surprised, wondering how they could have gotten into the workshop. When I gazed up and I looked around, my heart skipped a beat. And then another. My knees buckled, and I sat down hard, my jaw snapping shut with the impact. Dew-moist grass was beneath me, despite never having left the studio. Strangely, the grass was crimson red, the color of fresh blood. Insects I didn't recognize were scurrying in it, crawling up my arms. They were colorful and otherworldly, leaving rainbow-patterned footprints in their wake. The field of towering mushrooms stood in front of me, and it was actually there. It wasn't just an illusion of perspective and artistic mastery alone. No, I could feel fresh air on my face. I heard birds chirping all around me. There was the sound of a flute playing in the distance ahead, and gnomes were dancing merrily and singing beneath the shade of mushroom-capped roofs. Purple clouds floated in the sky, and a giant eyeball looked down at me like the moon, winking when it saw me. Too scared to scream, I began hyperventilating, terrified. My eyes started to search for an exit, but found no way out. It's beautiful here, isn't it? A voice asked from nearby. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place where I had heard it from. I thought you'd like it, my great-uncle Ivan said, reaching out his hand to help me to my feet. Most people didn't understand what I was doing out here, but I could see that you got it from the very beginning. You knew what the purpose of it all was. Standing on my feet, my terror began to evaporate, and I felt a smile spread across my face. Despite the surreal situation I had found myself in. Uncle Ivan, you can talk! It had been so many years since I heard the old man's voice. I'd forgotten what it sounded like. I can, he said, looking pleased. At least while I'm here. That's always been the case. Come on, go for a walk. He started ambling towards the mushroom village up ahead. The music of lutes and flutes and drums became louder, the gentle tones of singing voices rising up to greet us. I miss talking to you, Uncle Ivan, I said after a minute of silent walking. That's funny. I haven't really said anything yet. We both chuckled at that. Well, it's hard to find someone you're just as comfortable being quiet around as you are talking. And to be honest, I'm not really sure what to say after seeing all this. How long have you been coming to this place? Off and on for about a year. It was more off than on at first. Every time I came across a patch of black and white, it brought me out of it again. But the more I filled in, the longer I got to stay. I thought about this for a minute. It's all the way filled in now. Does that mean... Before I could finish my thought, he interrupted, pointing at the sky and putting his arm around me. Look, Jordan. It's a spectral dragon. That's what I've been calling it anyway. The creature came up over the purple-clouded mountain like the sunrise, then came crashing down the hills towards us, sending a flurry of cherry blossoms fluttering in the air like butterflies. The dragon reminded me of a kaleidoscope, as it morphed into every color of the rainbow before rising up into an air current at the last possible moment, narrowly avoiding crashing into the mushroom forest below, its long, snaking body extending for miles. It was soon lost above us in the clouds. A few moments later, the skyward cherry blossoms fell around us like snow, and continued in that way for a while afterwards, until the ground was pink with them. We kicked them up into the air with our feet as we walked, like fallen leaves in autumn. The gnomes didn't even interrupt their song, as if such things were an everyday occurrence. And I realized they probably were. This place is incredible, I said. No wonder you've been spending so much time out here. Uncle Ivan was smiling and nodding, seeing that I understood him even more now. But there was something off about him. He had lost weight, his face looked skeletal and thin. The change had been so slow I'd barely noticed, since I came out to his workshop pretty much every day, but he previously had chubby cheeks, a belly which overhung his belt. Now those things were gone, and he appeared gaunt and pale. Come, I'll show you my house, he said, laughing and taking my hand. Your house? He led me up the slope towards the mushroom village. The stalks of the fungi had windows and doors carved into them with care, and the quaint community reminded me of the downtown of a small medieval village. There were rustic shops with tables out front, a blacksmith and a market stall with fruits and vegetables. Gnomes were going about their lives in harmony and happiness. In here, Uncle Ivan said, opening the squeaky door at the base of the mushroom. He ducked his head and went inside to the low entry, and I followed after him. Once inside, I saw a tasteful decorated room with furnishings in purple, orange, and gold. There was no indication that we were inside a mushroom. It just looked like a regular house, only circular instead of square. He went over to a large cabinet and began to pull things from his pockets, shoving them inside the drawers. Just a minute. Let me get organized, Uncle Ivan said. He took a large horn beetle from one pocket of his bathrobe and stuffed it into a drawer, and started searching through the other drawers for something. I saw a purple octopus poke its head out of one, and he crammed it back inside. Another drawer sounded like it contained a swarm of bees, while another made a sound like a train whistle and the roar of a locomotive coming down the tracks. Uncle Ivan slammed that one shut quickly as the chugging, rattling noise of an approaching train became so loud it threatened to burst an eardrum. He breathed a sigh of relief, then opened a bottom drawer, retrieving a polka dot umbrella, and unfurled it. A dozen or so frogs fell out of the folds and began hopping around the floor, but he ignored them. Okay, all set. How about some breakfast? The two of us set out on the town and met gnomes on the way to a tea shop. They were singing Uncle Ivan's praises, literally. They had written several songs about him. Most seemed to proclaim him as a savior and a hero, vanquishing an evil enemy which came in the night. What's with the creepy songs? I asked, as we took a seat at a table outside the tea shop. They keep singing about a monster coming in the night. That's not real, is it? I mean, I thought this place was all about peace and beauty. You can't have good without evil, my uncle said, raising his hand to call over a gnome waiter. Yin and yang. You need one to have the other. This place couldn't be what it is without an evil underbelly. For heaven to exist, must be hell after all. Our waiter quickly poured our tea and then hustled away, his eyes fearful and his hand shaking as he overheard our conversation. Another member of the waitstaff brought a platter of biscuits and cakes and then hurried off as well, looking similarly frightened by the subjects that we were speaking about. Does it always come at night? The monster in the songs? Always. But it's okay. I know how to take care of it. I always protect the villagers here. They need me to protect them. I'm their savior. His eyes looked to be gazing far into the distance past me. I was suddenly worried again for my Uncle Ivan. I took a sip of the tea, but it didn't quench my thirst. I ate one of the cookies as well, but I felt no less hungry afterwards. My uncle ignored all the items in front of us, choosing instead to stare off into the distance. Once again, I remarked to myself how thin he looked. How unwell. Despite the beauty of his creation, despite the absolutely remarkable nature of it all, I was suddenly feeling scared. Not just for my uncle, but for me. I wanted to go home. I wanted to get out of this place. Opening my mouth to speak these thoughts aloud, it suddenly grew dark in the mushroom village and the surrounding fungi forest. A huge black cloud filled with booming thunder was rolling over us, and rain began to pour down, drenching us immediately. Gnomes ran to their houses and slammed their doors and windows shut. Open signs were pulled down from shop windows, and one saying closed replaced them. and yet still my Uncle Ivan stared off into the distance. "Uncle Ivan?" I said, grabbing his shoulder and squeezing it. "Uncle Ivan, are you there?" My heart started pounding faster as his glazed eyes remained fixed on some invisible object in the distance. For a second, I thought that he would stay like that forever. But then he blinked and focused on me again. "Oh, sorry. Must have been lost in my thoughts." He looked around and saw the darkness and the rain and stood up quickly. "Dear, oh dear, we should go. Quickly now. Come on, let's get back to the house before it's too late." I thought at first he was talking about going back to the real world and nearly jumped for joy. I followed after him in the pounding rain and splashed through the mud puddles as he led me back to his safe house inside the mushroom. It was only once we were inside that I heard the sounds coming from nearby, growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like the floor-shaking approach of a bear or a lion stalking towards us. My uncle grabbed the large wooden plank from behind the couch and brought it over to the door quickly, his eyes wide and fearful. "Help me with this, quickly. They'll be here any second." I hesitated, feeling as if something about this was wrong, but then my fear took over and I grabbed the other end of the wooden board and helped him lay it across the doorway, barricading it. A second later, the door began to pound and shake as something tried to force its way in from outside. It sounded like claws raking across the wood as the thing roared and banged against the entry with all of its might. "The hell is that thing?" I asked my uncle. He was too busy to answer, searching through his large dresser with its countless tiny drawers. "Where is it? Where is it?" he shouted, pulling one open after another. "Must be here. It has to be." I ran over to him, looking back over my shoulder at the door, as it nearly broke in two with the repeated impacts on the outside. Now it sounded like not just one creature, but several, their claws tearing through the wood like paper. "Uncle Ivan, we need to get out of here. They're gonna kill us." As he pulled open one drawer after another, I saw horrors inside each that I'll never forget. The dresser had been full of fun and whimsical items from what I had first seen, but now every drawer he opened had a nightmare inside. A hooded figure reached out with a skeletal arm, a scythe gripped in his bony fist. My uncle slammed the drawer shut before it could emerge. The next had a freakish monster with bulging eyes and squid-like tentacles, which snapped in the air and hissed, with a beaked mouth full of many sharp teeth. He closed that drawer hastily as well. The door we had barred shut began to splinter, and I could see forms through the growing cracks in the wood. It seemed as if one more impact would break it open, and we'd be murdered by whatever came inside to greet us. All darkness, fangs, and claws by the looks of it. My uncle finally found what he was looking for and pulled it out from the dresser drawer, shouting in triumph, "I found it! Let's get the hell out of here!" It was a paintbrush and an easel. He began to paint a picture on the wall beside him, working so quickly it didn't seem possible. A few moments after he had begun, there was a beautiful doorway with a blue sky and sunrise. There were trees and green grassy fields rolling out into the distance. "Come through here," he said, grabbing my arm. I didn't move, though. Something about all of this was wrong, I thought to myself again. Uncle Ivan needed my help, and this wasn't the way to help him. Escaping further into his fantasy world, going one step deeper into this dimension, or whatever this was, it wasn't going to help him. I studied his bony face and looked at his thin, frail hand reaching out to take mine. "Come on, what are you waiting for?" he asked, looking terrified, checking over my shoulder for the next impact from outside. "This isn't the way, Uncle Ivan," I said, realizing what I meant when I said it. "It's not the way home. I need to take you home. You need to eat and drink, and you need to get out of this place for a little while. You can't survive here. You can't live inside this world you created, or it'll kill you." "What? No, I can't leave. This is my home now. I need to protect it." The door splintered further with another loud bang as the dark forms forced their weight against the threshold. "Do you know what's on the other side of that door, Uncle Ivan? Have you ever waited to see what will come through? Or do you just escape further into your fantasies and run away every time?" He hesitated, looking as if he might jump through the doorway without me, escaping into the other world, never to be seen again. But then he turned to look at me and let out a deep, shuddering breath. "No, I always run away from it. Suppose I should look at it, though, shouldn't I?" "We all need to face our fears sometimes, Uncle Ivan," I said, taking his hand. "We'll face it together, whatever it is." He gripped my hand tightly, and we stood, waiting for our demise or whatever would come next. With a loud crash, the door broke open, and dark forms in the shape of every alpha predator began to squeeze through, looking like oversized nightmare images of their true selves. Shadowy bodies with no discernible features except for their teeth. Their teeth, which were too long and too sharp, gleaming white. As they closed in on us, I focused on that lack of color and remember those blank spots in the mural. I thought about home. I braced for the impact and for the teeth which would tear me to shreds. But they never came. When I opened my eyes and I looked up, I saw a wall in front of me with a wolf painted in black and white. It hadn't been filled in yet. A ray of sunshine was peeking in through the doorway which led outside, and I could hear birds chirping out there. We were back in my great-uncle's studio again, and he was beside me, holding my hand, squeezing it very tightly. Both of us let go at the same time, looking at each other and feeling slightly embarrassed for some reason, as if what had just happened hadn't really happened. "Looks like you missed a spot after all," I said to my uncle. He looked back at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Instead, he picked up his paintbrush, which was sitting nearby with an easel. Various colors were there on the board, waiting to be chosen to fill in the empty spots, to make the mural really, truly complete. My uncle went over to the spot with his paintbrush in hand, looking ready to fill in the emptiness. As he picked up the brush, his hand started to shake. Maybe from hunger. Maybe from something else. I laid a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Why don't you take a break for a little while, huh, Uncle Ivan? Let's go, let's grab a bite to eat. The mural will still be here tomorrow." He turned to look at me and smiled. Then he set the paintbrush and easel down on the floor again. Putting his arm around my shoulder, the two of us walked out from the paint fumes and into the fresh air of the backyard. "You know," I said, "I was kind of bummed out when I thought the mural was finished. Projects has been such a big part of both of our lives these last few years. Maybe you should leave that one spot blank, like a signature. A reminder of all the time and effort you put in. Here. In the real world." He nodded, his eyes focused and lucid for the first time since I'd seen him that day. Uncle Ivan pointed at a large mountain off in the distance. It took me a second to understand, but I'd always been able to see what he meant in those muted moments. And I did then, too. Yeah, like a landmark. So no matter what, you can always find your way back home. Do you know the story of the Candyman? Yeah, same one from the 1992 film based on a short story by Clive Barker. Candyman is a twisted amalgamation of classic myths and modern horror. The Candyman could be compared to the urban classic Bloody Mary, but this guy has a hook and some strange relationships with bees. There's an interesting backstory to the Candyman that places him on his own shelf in the urban lore bookshelf. I'll let you research that for yourself if you're not already familiar. At its most basic, I can explain the tale like this. Say his name 5 times in front of a mirror, and you'll die an incredibly fantastic death. Why would you invite your own demise? Well, because it's just a game, right? And it plays on all of your childhood curiosities and fears. Say Bloody Mary 3 times into the mirror? No. You do it! Well, we all know nothing will happen, so why don't you just say it then? So we all get caught up on the Candyman. Have you then heard of the Twizzler's man? More specific sugar-themed character? No, you haven't heard. Well then, please sit back, relax, grab a bag of popcorn and your favorite sweet treat. Turn off the lights. Or at least dim them. 1975. America's bicentennial. This story revolves around Alfred Welsh. Alfred lived by himself in his family's farmhouse for his entire life, grew up milking cows, mending fences, preparing various livestock for consumption, to both commercial and individual sale. Alfred had several siblings helping with the various tasks around the farm. Throughout the years, they all found different callings. Alfred stayed. When both his parents passed, one not too far from the other, The Welsh family farm was solely his. Most farming families had children just for the help, and Alfred never found his way to this path. Awkward, tall, and skinny, and perpetually smelling like cow dung. Just didn't seem in the cards for him. Being a farmer is a noble job. They produce the food that feeds much of the country. This was before the Walmart-style farms that mechanically and methodically produce genetically enhanced animals that are now delivered to our door. Being a farmer didn't make him unappealing to women. He lived in a rural farmland where farming was what most of them did. No, Alfred was off. The word back then might have been a spaz or touched. He wasn't. Alfred was incredibly intelligent. He read every paper he could find, excelled in math, science, before having to focus more on his work at home. The stories that came out after were alarming. The neighbors complained of missing pets. More than one claimed to see Alfred attempting to peep at the girls under the school's bleachers during Friday night football games. None of these confirmed to be true, of course. By the year 1975, he was an adult, firmly handling the Welsh family farm estate. For years, the farm was staying above water, impressive being that he had no children of his own to help with the multiple chores needed to keep up daily production. There was no job too small on a farm. It was here that he enlisted the help of a handful of town boys. Alfred made it known that the help was needed, and he even paid a meager wage if his friends in the community would oblige. Alfred was strange, sure, but he was not disliked at all. He was also known as kind of the town handyman. He had a mechanical mind that allowed him to fix anything from the school drinking fountain to one of his colleagues' heavy-duty John Deere tractors. Kept him calm. If you grew up in a rural area, especially pre-internet era, you could imagine how valuable someone like Alfred would be. Calling an actual mechanic wouldn't only take time, but would hurt your wallet pretty bad. Alfred barely asked for a 25-cent bottle of Coca-Cola. Alfred kept busy between his farm work and his small-town projects. He truly loved giving work to the town children. It was a good experience for them, and it helped him mightily. Keeping the pens clean was just one crucial job that kept his farm working. He managed this goodwill for quite a long time. It was a story that rocked this small farming community. Police were perplexed. The small town force was not equipped to investigate over a dozen missing children. The necessary technology was not there to help. When one of the missing children turned up dead, massacred in a heinous fashion, it changed many lives. All that was found near the unfortunate 13-year-old child was one shoe and just 2 pieces of Twizzler candies. Current year, 2022, Anno Domini, Mr. Dark Knight, one of, if not the very first YouTubers to feature mainly scary content. Real name unknown. He must have decided early that he would not reveal his identity, but was totally fine with revealing what he looked like. 2006 was a different world in YouTube terms. There's really no VTubers back then either way. Mr. DN, as he's known to most of his subscribers, started doing the now well-known countdown of scariest whatevers. Could be top 9 scariest buildings, ghost sightings, abandoned psych wards, etc. He smartly moved to actually investigating some of these famous haunts right when the ghost hunter fever hit in about 2007. If you were around during this time, then bless you, especially if you loved paranormal culture. Ghost hunting was seen as kind of lame, to put it plainly, on mainstream network television, even cable TV. Eventually, the paranormal community broke down the walls of Gerecke, letting the powers that be know that they wanted content of ghost sightings, creepy shadows, and EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena. Mr. DN was right there, bringing his team of ragtag friends to attempt to pierce the veil in such sites as the Clown Motel, the Stanley Hotel, and the defunct Sloss Furnace in Birmingham, Alabama. He even did a tour of some of Europe's most famous haunts, traversing some of the most interesting medieval settings in history. His channel exploded. Which brings us here. Mr. Dark Knight has teased his next investigation. He and his team will be traveling to the middle of the United States plains, see if this modern-day Twizzler Man legend is indeed fact or fiction. What's up, guys? Mr. DN here. Welcome, Dark Nation. We are here in the supposed town that the legendary Twizzler Man legend was born. A lot of you asked for this, and I'm here to say that I was completely unfamiliar with this one. Candyman, heard of. Bloody Mary, heard of. The birthday face guy, April Fool's killer, I know, but this one was different. Apparently back in the mid-70s, there was an unfortunate rash of missing children in this rural farm town. A dozen children went missing from what I could research. Some of them turned up in the most worst ways imaginable. You all know me. I don't dive into the grotesque or gore aspects. You can find another content creator for that. You can also search this online for yourself. There were 3 children that were found deceased. Unceremonious is the word that comes to mind. The last victim was found with a couple Twizzler candies next to his corpse, hence the sick name of this urban legend. Not one arrest has ever been made. I was curious as to the basic history of Twizzlers. Seems like they were somewhat new, no? Well, apparently Twizzlers were introduced in 1929, after World War I and before World War II. Hershey's produced them, in fact. Now, it's somewhat notable that Dark Knight is filming this as part of his TV show. Some from the younger generation might see this as a step backward. Online media is clearly the king at this moment. Television is quickly becoming seen as the way of the dinosaur, but Mr. DN is a little older than the average YouTuber. He's 1 year from becoming 40, meaning that he still holds a special place in his heart for TV. Getting your own show on basic cable is an accomplishment. He is more than thrilled to be hosting his own 30-minute, highly edited show on one of the travel channels that hosts such paranormal bangers these days. The Dark Knight crew pulls up to the alleged Welsh farmhouse in a convoy of about 4 black Cadillac Escalade rentals. Not only were they slick and stylish, but they are also still a symbol of making it. And they have room for the crew and their modest cache of TV equipment. The scout crew has already set up the farmhouse. DN did not want to see the place ahead of time. He wanted a shot of him driving, walking up to the site of what may be one of America's lesser-known serial killer abodes. And he made the right call. Yo. Dark Knight looks in stunned silence. What is this, some Freddy Krueger shit? One of his producers frowns, starting to remind him that he can't curse, but quickly thinks better of it. We can easily edit or censor that. Let the man continue with his genuine reaction. It's true. They burned this man's house with him inside. Mr. DN takes a moment to let this location wash over him. He's a spot in the middle of miles of farmland. Nothing else would be noticeable about this place, except that we're looking at the charred remains of a home attached to a legend that's never been introduced to the larger American audience. All DN saw was the remains of a stone chimney, and a perimeter of what used to be a home. A slab of old concrete made up the base, and a basement hatch could be made out on one of the sides of the home. Not sure if this was a fruit or meat cellar, or what it was meant for. It appeared the home itself did not have a basement. Okay, we're going to set up here and start taking a preliminary look at this area. Tonight, my team and I will be doing some sessions trying to summon the Twizzler Man. I'll explain the ritual later. I just can't believe this place is actually real. How does no one know about this? Mr. DN then goes into a little more history of the lore. Town historians estimate that between the years of 1975 and 1981, more than a dozen children had gone missing from the small town's farming community. A lot of parents had gained suspicion of Alfred being the key suspect, as the children, that had been loaned out as help, had been the ones missing. The police could never find a connection to Alfred. One unnamed parent told the local paper that he thought it was weird that all Alfred ever asked was for a bottle of Coke and maybe a package of Twizzlers. When the Twizzler candy was found at the site of one of the last victims, the town was livid. No waiting for the police to continue their investigation, which they already felt was lacking. They apparently marched to the Welsh residence with pitchforks and torches, a la Frankenstein, and burned the house down, knowing, or maybe not knowing, that Alfred was inside. Again, this is all part of the legend. The house was burned down, that we know is fact, and we know that now seeing it, Alfred was also found burned to death inside. He never received a burial or an obituary. This has the feeling of a small town keeping the story under wraps and just sweeping it under the proverbial rug. Chilling stuff. The night of the investigation, 2022. What is up, Dark Nation? It is your boy, Mr. Dark Knight again. I already gave you a quick history lesson on the Twizzler Man. Now, did you know that almost 47 years later, people are going missing again in this same town? I know. Can this get any more Nightmare on Elm Street? This time, though, it's not like he's going after the children of the parents that killed him. A strange game has surfaced by seemingly unrelated folks. Amateur ghost hunters and urban legend fans have grabbed hold of this new Twizzler Man challenge. On Reddit, on 4chan, they flock to this farm town to complete this game. Some to their own demise. Mr. DN then puts the disclaimer that while some mysterious deaths have occurred by outsiders to this area, none have officially been confirmed as a result of playing this internet ritual. Here's the game. Travel to the site or even the town where Alfred lived. For liability's sake, I won't be naming the actual town or state. Find a solid base, such as concrete or wood, on the ground, and draw a door in chalk. Surround yourself in a protective barrier of salt, bringing 12 pieces of Twizzlers as an offering, or an homage to the apparent victim. Repeat the following by yourself or with a group. Doesn't matter either way. Alfred, see me. Alfred, hear me. Alfred, tell me what happened. Say it 3 times. After the incantation is done, close your eyes. Keep them closed for at least 30 seconds, and when you open them, count the candies. If there are less than the ones that you placed, you are successful, and the Twizzler Man will be visiting you soon. To do what? No one's documented. If you have more, then we all know it might be too late. Mr. Dark Knight takes a moment with his crew, doing their pre-game ritual at every investigation. It's showtime. What is up, Dark Nation? It's the moment you've all been waiting for. We are here at the supposed site of possibly one of the darkest, deadliest killers in our history. But is it true? We're going to do a ritual tonight. Stay tuned, fam. DN's right-hand girl, Mrs. DN, chalks the ground where Alfred lived and died. She then pours the salt and places 12 Twizzler candies as carefully as if they contained anthrax. She nods to the host of the show, letting him know that it's ready. Filming? He asks. A nod from the cameraman confirms they are. Okay, Dark Nation, here we are. I will now step into the circle. Dark Knight takes a breath, slowly falls to his knees and starts the chant. Alfred, see me. Alfred, hear me. Alfred, tell me what happened. The camera zooms mythically on Mr. Dark Knight's face. 30 seconds of eerie silence. Then he opens his eyes. He looks around, taking in the environment that doesn't seem to change. He looks to his producer, his partner, and his cameraman. I don't feel anything, do you guys? Camera shakes a confirmational no. How about, wait, how many Twizzlers did you put down? 12, yeah, 12, like the ritual said. Mr. DN continues to count the Twizzlers, mouthing the number. After counting them once, an overpresent look of fear comes over him. He counts again. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 14 licorice pieces here. I found this journal in my local gym alongside some odd-looking workout supplements. I've been debating using them, but I'm not sure. What's written in the journal has me second-guessing myself, so I'll copy the contents here. Tell me what you guys think I should do. God damn it, Jerry, I told you before, it's never gonna happen. You already had your chance. Those were the final words the last time I spoke to my ex-wife. I'm 6 foot 3 inches tall and 240 pounds. I had grown into an average dad bod and not very athletically shaped, but by no means fat, yet she still left me with the excuse that I was too fat for her. I begged and I pleaded with her, claiming I could lose some weight. I would work out until I was back to her liking. She was willing to hear none of it. Her mind was made up. She was leaving. Yeah, like many of my friends had suggested, I thought there might be something else behind the scenes. I mean, she could have been leaving me for someone else that she had been seeing. I didn't want to picture her thinking about that possibility. I felt that if I didn't imagine it, then it would prevent it from being true. I wanted her back, no matter how much I worked for it. My thought was to lose weight and get into shape, and then maybe I could call her, show her how much I had changed. In my delusional mind, this sounded like the perfect plan. I mean, what's a few weeks at the gym and eating healthier? It's probably something I should have been doing either way, just for myself. So that's what I was going to do. I began by going to the grocery store. I planned all my meals for the next week, paying close attention to the number of calories and sugar and fat content of each item. I figured that if the average person required 2,000 calories per day, just as a baseline, I'd be working out and exercising plus reducing my calorie intake to 1,500 per day. I mean, I'm no doctor or dietitian or anything like that. Honestly, I'm just some dude who works in IT for a call center, but that method made sense. Burn more calories than you take in means you lose weight instead of gaining it, right? Going to the gym every day on top of that would help me tone and at least slightly look more muscular along with all the weight that I'd be losing. I felt fantastic on my way home from the store, dreaming about how good I was going to look and how quickly I'd be able to do it if I was determined enough, you know? I thought over and over to myself that this was going to work. I'd soon be getting my ex-wife Stephanie back. Starting the next day was the first day of my mission. I was going to get up extra early, pack my meals for the day, go to the gym for an hour, then to work, then back to the gym for another hour or so. That was going to be my routine every day until I made it where I wanted to be. And she took me back. After the first week, I felt terrific. After my Friday workout, I stepped on the scale and I learned that I had already lost 5 pounds. My plan was working, and I had gone from wanting to lose 50 to 45 pounds in 1 week. My body felt better. I don't know if it was just a delusion of how good I felt, but I thought I already looked more fit. I already looked more muscular. Again, that weekend I went to the store and I planned out my meals for the next week. I thought Stephanie was bound to be impressed and take me back when I completed my transformation. That Sunday night, I was too excited about my progress to stay up, and I went to bed early to wake up and get to the gym the next day. The second week felt rough. My muscles, my body became sore from all the new strain. When I stepped on the scale that Friday at the gym, I noticed I had somehow gained back the 5 pounds from the week before. There was no excuse I could think of for not keeping on the same loss pattern as before. As I've been told many times before in my life, muscle weighs more than fat. The only problem was when I looked in the mirror, I didn't feel like I'd gained much muscle. My stomach still hadn't changed from the flabby gut that I started with. Still, I stuck to my diet, my workout routine. The third week, I noticed a strange man that I would often see sitting on a bench in the back of a locker room. He sat in basketball shorts and a hoodie with an oversized hood that dropped down over his face, concealing it in shadows. Every part of exposed skin seemed to bulge with lean muscle. Nothing about the man himself was strange, but what I did find odd was that I never saw him out on the floor lifting any weights, or really anything but sitting there. I never saw him leave or enter the locker room, but he sat there 3 or 4 days a week. I ignored his presence for the most part. Yet after rechecking my weight that Friday and seeing that I had gained another 4 pounds again without losing any of my gut, I couldn't seem to get the image of him sitting there on the bench at the back of the locker room out of my mind. I thought how eerie it was that I never saw the man move. Nearly to the point I'm not sure I even noticed him breathing, although I know he was. The shadow of his hood hid his dark, stoic face. I didn't know if he sat watching all the gym patrons as they came and went, or if there was another purpose for his absence in the locker room. After so long of thinking about it, I concluded that he must be some sort of security guard, some kind of officer to prevent people from stealing things from the lockers or the gym bags. Although the guy put off a very creepy vibe, it sort of made sense to have someone in there. It was like having a living security camera when you couldn't legally put a camera in there. My new conclusion of the strange man's purpose still didn't entirely sit right with me, but it was enough for me to carry on with my workout without overthinking it. Though not entirely, I grew accustomed to seeing the man there when I went to the gym. It almost became a ritual for me to check if he was there or not, every day, when I entered the locker room. I learned that he was in there 5 days a week, but the days that he was gone were never the same, and we never back-to-back. One week he'd be gone Monday and Thursday, while he might be gone Wednesday and Friday the next. By the end of the second month of paying close attention to my diet and going to the gym every day, I had only seen very little progress. I had only lost 6 pounds and gained minimal muscle definition. At this rate, it'd be forever before I could get the chiseled physique I needed to get my wife back. I had to keep trying, though. I didn't want to get back into the dating scene again, and she was perfect for me as far as I was concerned. I didn't know what I had done to win her over in the first place, but if she said that my being out of shape was the problem, well, that was something I could fix. I just had to keep working on it. However, in the back of my mind, I knew that if it took too long, my moment might pass and I would never be able to get her back. I began looking online, searching and watching through every little lose your belly fat with this one weird trick I could find, trying to find something that would work for me. I researched all the latest diets and exercise tips and tricks, tried different weight loss supplements, and did nearly anything else that I could think of. In my head, time was running out and I needed to hurry this along. When she left me, she told me that she didn't want me to talk to her. I knew that I could change her mind if I did this. Every day, the massive man sat watching me show up, change, push myself into the point of collapse before returning exhausted to the locker room. He would watch as I finished every day by stepping up to the scale and returning to the bench utterly defeated. And then it happened. He spoke but a single question, as well as moved. I had grown so accustomed to him sitting motionless that I had all but forgotten he was even there. So it startled me to see him move and hear him speak. His voice was deep, guttural, booming. What would you sacrifice to become? I didn't understand the question, as well clearly shown on my face. My confusion only increased as I watched the behemoth of a man rise from his typical seated position. His footsteps thundered on the ground as he walked to leave the locker room. He was clearly off to whatever else it was he did. And in my panic for answers, I began to bombard him with queries about his odd, chosen question. Become what? Stronger? Thinner? I'd give anything. Please, how can I look like that? No response came from him as he moved. Instead, he simply turned the corner and disappeared. I rushed out of the locker room after him, hoping to get more answers to my questions, but as I entered the main gym area in a panic, I was met with nothing but confused looks. I called out into the gym, asking where the man went. I asked frantically 3 times before one of the trainers pulled me aside and began to speak to me. Sir, I need you to calm down and explain. Seem to have lost someone. Can you describe them for me? What the fuck do you mean describe him? He was like 7 foot tall, black guy, built like a brick shithouse. I mean, seriously, the guy looked like he chugged gallons of steroids and snorted protein powder. There's no way in hell you could have missed him. He was huge. So where did he go? Did this man take something from you? Did they assault you in some form or another? What? No. God damn it. He said something to me and he walked out. I need to know what he meant. Please, this is important to me. Okay, now, again, where did he go? At this point, another muscle-ridden personal trainer from the gym had shown up and led the 3 of us into the back office. Sir, my name's Garrett. I guess you can consider me as the manager on duty. So we can check the cameras. We can see if we can find a way to know where they went. Garrett led the way, following me and the other trainer that never stated his name, and I didn't care enough to ask. The office was small and quaint. It was sparsely furnished, with little more than a small desk and a couple of plastic and wire chairs. A large monitor sat on the desk connected to a slightly outdated computer. The walls were furnished much like I would expect a gym addict's dorm room to look. Posters of protein shake powders, pre-workout supplements, some guy in a Speedo flexing an alarming number of muscles at the most recent Mr. Universe or, I don't know, some other weightlifting idol. Typically, I'm a man of moderate to impressive amounts of patience. However, something about being within those walls caused all the patience to expel from my body faster than a colony of mice in a burning building. Finally, after some quick typing, a few loud sighs, and some mouse clicks, Garrett turned to me to speak. "Are you sure this man left the locker room?" Yes, I'm sure. Why do you ask? And how does nobody know what I'm talking about? This behemoth of a guy is in the locker room nearly every damn day. I thought that he was some type of security guy for you. Now you're telling me that he isn't? Sir, I feel this is only going to confuse you more, but you were the only person in or out of the locker room for the past 30-ish minutes now. What? Yeah, no joke. Look for yourself, he said, as he turned the large monitor to face me. Chet, can you go check the locker room to see if there's anyone in there that might fit the guy's description? The other trainer, apparently named Chet, simply nodded and left the room. I watched as Garrett clicked back onto the camera timeline to the point where I first entered the locker room after my workout. As the seconds ticked by into minutes, I watched as no other souls even came near the entrance, let alone went in or came out. Finally, after a few moments of watching the tape, I saw my own face emerge from the doorway, plastered with a look of frantic confusion. I felt as though my brain was short-circuiting. I knew I had seen him leave. I heard the question he boomed at me as he passed. I could feel the vibrations on the floor as his footsteps moved him through the room, yet the video did not show even the slightest hint of him leaving ahead of me. Suddenly embarrassed at the situation, I shook my head, trying to clear it. Thoughts began to cross my mind that I may have dreamt the entire scenario up. I looked at Garrett, still slightly confused, as I rose from my seat. I'm sorry. I haven't been sleeping lately. I must have fallen asleep at the locker room or something. Again, I'm so sorry for the hassle. It must have been some really vivid dream or something. Garrett stood up for a second, looking me over with a very skeptical look that he couldn't seem to hide. After a few short seconds, he matched my pose and stood from his chair before responding. Well, in that case, sir, I suggest you head home and get much-needed sleep. Remember, rest is essential for muscle recovery. He flashed me a very smug grin, and it was all I could do to prevent myself from rolling my eyes at him before leaving the room. As I walked back to the locker room to gather my things, I again ran into Chet, who decided to stop me. Hey, sir, I couldn't find any trace of the guy you were talking about. You sure everything's cool, bro? Yeah, I'm good. I'm all good. I spoke with Garrett a little more, and I think I may have just dreamt it up due to some sleep deprivation. Oh, okay. Well, rest is important to muscle recovery. Yeah, I know. Garrett said the same thing to me. I interrupted. I'm going to head home and let myself recover, as you call it. Chet seemed slightly offended that I finished his sentence for him and left for the office without another word. As I reached for my bag and left to go, I noticed that something felt off about it. It felt heavier than I remembered it being when I brought it in. Not just by a few ounces, either. If that had been the case, I doubt I would have noticed. It was heavier by 5 or more pounds, acting a little more enthusiastically than was necessary for the situation. I dropped the bag, I ripped the zipper open, and I threw the flap back. Sitting under an extra pair of gym shorts was a small container that looked to have some sort of pills inside, along with 2 tubes of a very strange-looking cream. The labeling on the item was a paradox. They somehow looked both amateur and professional at the same time. It was as if a bootleg copy was actually the real deal. The tubes of cream had a picture of a very gaunt but happy-looking person with a cartoon-looking speech bubble. Inside the bubble were the words, "The weight just falls off." I couldn't help but admit that something about the advertising seemed very compelling to me. I mean, after trying nearly everything else I had found, maybe this one would be what I needed to drop the pounds and get my ex-wife back. I decided to take the cream and pills back to my place to inspect them further. As I turned to leave, I caught a quick glance at myself in the mirror. My ex-wife's voice instantly bellowed through my mind. How do you expect me to love you when you're as fat and lazy as you've gotten? Some people might think that she was being mean and rude, but it's okay because she was right. And how could she love me when I had put on an extra 10 or 20 pounds? That's not the person she married. I'd become a fat slob, and it was okay for her to feel like that and say that stuff, right? And either way, it didn't matter because I was going to lose the weight. I was going to get her back. I just hoped that this new stuff would do the trick. The strangeness of how it appeared in my bag was easily overshadowed by the possibility of it helping me achieve what I wanted. When I got home, I dumped my gym bag out into the counter like a drunk girl trying to find her car keys. I grabbed the container of pills and began reading the label. It seemed to be the same branding as the tube of cream, and in my excitement, I merely skimmed over a lot of the information written until I got to the directions for use. The bottle told me, for the best results, take 1 pill morning and night for a month. I thought that would be easy enough, and it even said that it didn't need an extensive workout regimen to go with it. The instructions for the cream were even more straightforward. They said apply cream to problem areas once a day, and the fat-burning ingredients would make it all fall away. I figured that if I used these 2 items, plus I kept up my workouts, I'd lose the weight and be back with my ex in no time at all. It seemed like a relatively foolproof plan to me, and even if I had no proof that it was him, I knew that the strange giant of a man from the locker room was the one that left this stuff in my bag. I thought to myself that whether or not he responded, I needed to thank him next time I saw him. Those first few days, I decided to only take the pills, and I'd add the cream after the first week. The pills made my jaw ache and made me feel like I had turned into a furnace. The amount of heat that began to radiate from my body alarmed me at first. However, I soon began to think, this must be why they called it fat burning. The sudden rise in body heat caused me to feel the need to check my temperature. Although it was definitely elevated, it never seemed to reach what I would consider fever levels. After the first week, I began to add the cream to my weight loss regime. It was very similar to the pills in the sense that it caused wherever I applied it to have an intense burning sensation. They worked, though, and I've been more excited about it. In the first 2 weeks, I had lost 8 pounds, which was better than what I had accomplished in the months at the gym before. I was hooked. It worked so well, I even stopped going to the gym. I didn't need to anymore. As long as I followed the directions, the weight just kept going away. By the time I had lost 12 pounds, all I could think about was losing more. The only thing on my mind was waiting till I could take the next pill. I quickly lost any desire to eat or even sleep. Pacing back and forth from the counter in the kitchen to the scale in the bathroom, I suddenly remembered my original purpose. Her words again rang in my mind. Some comment about how being the fat, ugly fuck that I was, nobody would ever want to love me. Her exact words didn't matter because as I stood on the scale for the 10th time that day, I noticed that I had lost another pound since that morning. I was going to do it. I was going to win her back for sure. I yelled out in excitement at the progress I was seeing. I know I already used the cream today, but what could it hurt if I double it up? Should cause it to work faster, shouldn't it? I muttered to myself as I walked to the counter. Putting on a second coat of the cream caused my flesh to burn much more than usual, but it also somehow began to give me a numbing sensation. The nerves in my stomach and chest dulled to the point that I could barely feel my finger as I poked my belly. Well, that's an interesting side effect, I thought to myself. As I finished rubbing the layer over my body, the numb feeling began to overtake my entire form, and as much as I thought that it was better than the burning pain, it proved to cause normal functions to become difficult. My balance seemed to be thrown off because of the fact that I couldn't feel when my feet touched the ground. After that first day, I began to understand how to function, basically without my sense of touch. It took a lot of guessing and a lot of trial and error, but by the end of the day, I seemed to be able to move around as if nothing had happened. I even convinced myself to check the scale and mirror. I looked skinnier and I felt lighter. The scale said that I had only lost another 4 pounds, but I thought that if I began to use the cream twice a day instead of once, I'd be able to lose weight much faster, and finally, I'd be able to get my ex-wife back. She would be so pleased by my progress. I just knew it. The next day, after putting on my second layer of cream and taking the pills as always, I decided that with losing the weight, I should start going back to the gym to build some muscle in place of my missing fat. Driving my car to the gym with my body completely numb proved to be much more dangerous than I had anticipated, but I managed to make it in one piece. I walked in filled with more confidence than I'd ever had, until I began to hear the whispers. Hey, look at that guy. Ugh, why does he look like that? Is it safe for him to be in here? That looks really bad. Is his skin boiling? That's disgusting. Yeah, why is he all yellow and purple like that? I did my best to ignore everything that I heard and just get on with my workout. As I was doing curls with some free weights, I was able to see what they had been talking about. The mirror before me displayed a terrifying sight. The skin on my biceps and around my ribs had turned a yellowish purple. Blisters began to form over the bruises. The voice in my head began to scream about how disgusting I looked. My focus quickly shifted from my own reflection to the reflection of everyone else in the gym. They looked like they were hidden behind various pieces of equipment, snickering at me. I could feel their eyes on me, and the sudden flood of embarrassment filled my body with fear. But what if I stayed like this? What if I was getting sick from the cream? Do I need to go to the hospital? I nearly crushed my feet as I dropped the weights in my hands and tried sprinting out of the door. After the first few strides, my numbing coordination failed me, and I fell hitting the ground hard. I could feel a few of the blisters on my chest and arms burst as I made contact with the matted floor. I quickly stood up and rushed again for the door, again falling after only a few strides. My heart pounded in my chest, and I screamed out in pain as more blisters broke and drug raw flesh across the ground. Pus poured from the blisters, and in a sad attempt to reduce the scene that I was creating, I stood again and attempted more of a calculated walk to my car. By the time I made it there, I convinced myself that all the hospital would do was waste my time on something that I could do myself at home. So instead, I stopped on the way home, and I purchased antibiotic creams, I purchased bandages, and a large roll of gauze. When I reached my house and made it inside, I removed my shirt, only to realize it was much worse than I thought. Or possibly had progressed since I left the gym. My entire torso, everywhere I had used the cream, had turned into a black, yellow, and purple bruise. Various blisters covered my chest and had burst, leaving a disgusting yellow trail of pus flowing down my body. The smell of necrotic flesh filled my nostrils as the yellow ooze flowed from my burst blisters. I quickly wrapped my wounds in bandages and gauze as I repeated the same few phrases over and over again. It's working so well. I can deal with this. It'll go away after I'm done. I just gotta keep going. As soon as I was done wrapping up all of my new development, I couldn't stop myself from getting on the scale. I had lost nearly 50 pounds. And bandaged chest aside, I felt like I looked great. I at least felt like I looked better than I did, but I was also beginning to see myself the way Stephanie saw me. I wasn't perfect yet. I at least felt like I looked better than I did, but I also began to see myself the way Stephanie saw me. I wasn't perfect yet, and I could lose more weight and gain more muscle. I was too excited by how far I had come, and I sent a message to my ex, asking me to meet up and see what she thought of my progress. I was already convinced that I had made strides in my progress, and honestly, I thought that I had already achieved the look that she was looking for. Somehow, I'll admit, I was slightly surprised when she agreed. That Friday, she agreed to have dinner with me. That was only a few days away, and I could still lose more by then. Everything was going just the way I had imagined it would. I knew the boils and bruises were there, but I could always hide them with bandages and a shirt. I couldn't even begin to describe the excitement that filled my body at the thought of getting my wife back. I did my best not to bother her until Friday, which wasn't very hard because I focused on my new routine. The cream still burned my skin as I put it on, but it seemed to be working. The blisters and the discoloration seemed to be getting worse. But I could worry about that after I had dinner with Stephanie. After all, I could just hide it until later when I finally stopped needing the pills and the cream. The pills seemed to increase the effects exponentially. I did notice that my skin had turned wet and slimy around the blistering areas. I just thought that as long as it didn't spread to an area I couldn't cover up with pants and a shirt, I'd be fine. I was only slightly scared at realizing that with all the exercise and very limited diet, my health began to decline. However, I simply kept thinking of a couple of old sayings like, beauty is pain and the risk is worth the reward. I got to her old favorite restaurant early. That way I could be there with a table waiting for her. The place wasn't a 5-star place, but it was fancy. Food was terrific. The table I got wasn't at the front window, but it was close enough for me to see her walk up to the building. My heart raced with anticipation. I was so excited at how well this was going to go. She walked in, and I could see as the hostess led her over to my table, she looked up. She stopped about 10 feet short of the table with a jaw-dropped smile before beginning to speak, or rather exclaim, "Oh my God, look at you! You look so much better!" The dinner was great. I was as giddy as a schoolgirl because it was going just as I had imagined. As we stood up just before leaving, my heart screamed with desire for things to go back to how they were before. The reality of what was going on with my body snapped back into the front of my head as she went in for a hug. As her body pressed against mine, I could feel a few more blisters on my chest burst beneath the bandages. Walking out of the restaurant, she nearly caused my jaw to fall to the floor. She whispered something in my ear. "Why don't we go back to my place for a while?" I nearly had a miniature panic attack as my heart began to race. This was going so much better than I even dreamed of. If she wanted to do what I thought she wanted to do, I didn't know what to do about the wounds and the bruises all over my body. I was terrified that she would see, but followed that thought by telling myself that I could just keep my shirt on. Everything would be fine. I would just still hide it until I could deal with it another time. It'd work out great until later when I could focus on that problem. "Oh, well, I suppose with how good it's been seeing you, what better way to end the night?" I finally responded. On the one hand, it felt as though we were moving extremely fast, but I also realized that it wasn't very long ago that we were married. That afterthought made me feel even more that things were just getting back to how they were, rather than starting over, so to speak. As we lay in our bed, things quickly became serious. I tried my hardest to get in the mood for what was to come, but every time she rubbed against my body, I could feel another blister burst under the bandages. I prayed to gods I didn't even believe in that the smell wouldn't permeate the bandages or give everything away. Finally, she removed her clothes in front of me, and I once again saw the amazing body I so missed. She said the words I'd been dreading most. "Your turn. Take those clothes off." I removed my pants, but I kept my shirt on, and I went in to progress the night, but she stopped me. "Shirt too. I want to see all those new muscles you have." I can't. There's something up with my chest. I'd rather keep the shirt on." "Take the shirt off or this isn't happening," she demanded. I removed my shirt reluctantly as fear flooded my body. I only exposed the bandages, but it was enough to cause my fear to spike as she spoke. "Why are you all wrapped up? Take it off. I want to see." "No, trust me, you don't right now. This will go better if you don't see it." "Remove it now," she said in a rather unnecessarily stern voice. Sheepishly, I removed the bandages, revealing the boils and blisters that covered my chest and stomach. Her instant repulsion floored me and caused my heart to slam into my stomach as it fell. She retched and nearly puked off the side of the bed, screaming the same 2 words over and over. "Get out." I grabbed my clothes, and for some reason the bandages and I ran out of the house as I put it all back on. Part of me felt ashamed, yet my brain began screaming at me that I could fix this, I could make my body perfect. I just had to get back to the gym, I had to keep using the products. That's all that I needed to make this work. But unfortunately, I couldn't help myself from giving in to that second thought. The next day I was back at the gym. I was pushing myself to the limits as I drove myself to form the perfect body. The creams, the pills, they helped. As I struggled through the burn and the blisters, however, I noticed that no matter how much of the supplements I used, they always remained just as full as if I'd never opened them. The blisters and the bruises began spreading over my entire body. I could see it traveling down my arms and my legs as I used it more and more. I had grown accustomed to ignoring the remarks and the snickers of other gym inhabitants. I'd burst a new blister, releasing that foul-smelling pus with each rep, and I could tell, as everyone seemed to keep their distance from me. I assumed that it was from the looks, or the wounds, or the smell. But I knew that I could make my body perfect if I kept going. I would make it suitable for her, no matter what. The following week, I finally learned just how bad it had gotten. I walked into the gym with a welcoming party of disgusted looks and people going out of the way to avoid me. I dropped my bag off in the locker room, I took the pills, I rubbed the cream all over my blister-covered body, popping a few. As I walked out onto the gym floor, my clumsiness caused me to run shoulder first into one of the machines. The next few moments became a blur as I heard a wet splash followed by screaming. I ricocheted off of that machine and I bumped into another. The second impact was quickly followed by another sloppy splat of a sound and more screaming, and by the time I looked down, I'd realized chunks of skin and flesh had fallen from my body with each impact. The splashing sound had been the meat landing on the floor. I felt my heart skip a beat as one of the trainers approached me. Chet was his name, and he seemed very concerned. Instead of responding to his patronizing claims, saying that I needed a hospital immediately and that he was a breath away from removing me from the gym, I panicked. I ran from him to the locker room. Pulling the cream and the pills from my bag, I threw them as hard as I could to the locker room corner, causing them to bounce off the massive man that I noticed was once again sitting in his usual place. I had so many questions for him, but all I could get out was, why? Why me? He stood as he spoke his final words, traversing the locker room and walking out the door. Your greed was your demise. Did you get what you wanted? Or as Icarus, did you fly too close to the sun? Your tragedy is your own doing. I sat nearly in tears in the locker room, terrified, scribbling furiously in my journal as his words dug deep into my mind. Seconds after his footsteps left the locker room, hurried men ran into the room, pushing a gurney. My heart raced, my nerves tense as I let out a brief horrified scream as I looked down, realizing I had begun bleeding profusely after my skin had removed itself while watching him watch over me. Sir, are you all right? Said one of the paramedics. I can fix this. I can fix this. I can make this perfect. The smell. A stale combination of grease and sweat wafted through the open door as Robert followed his daughter into Playland. Beyond, a cacophony of gleeful screams mixed and mingled into a banshee's song. The glassed-in room located off the side of the fast food restaurant housed a jumble of brightly colored tubes and slides. A dozen children swarmed over the garish plastic like fleas on a stray. "Take your shoes off!" Robert yelled after Lily. The little girl flew towards the structure like a 40-pound cannonball, erupting giggles as she went. A series of tables surrounded the architectural acid trip that was the Playland, forming a semicircle. Most of the tables were occupied by tired-looking adults, the telltale signs of bags under their eyes and unkempt hair, of stained clothing and defeated slants to their mouths, said they were parents. Robert could sympathize with them. Before the divorce, when he was still a full-time parent, he found taking care of Lily to be a near overwhelming proposition. Now, only having the 5-year-old one weekend a month, she longed for those tired days. Lily's absence in his life created an unfillable hole, a void in his very guts, the kind of absence that should kill him, but didn't. Somehow, even with a vital piece missing, life went on. Spotting a table in the corner, Robert tightened his grip on the brown plastic food tray and wandered through the chaos. Although the fun was theoretically supposed to be contained to the plastic octopus-like Playland, the children, not only free from constraint, but outright encouraged to use up all their energy, would spill out with abandon all across the room. 2 boys, both decked out in neon-colored garb, zigzagged around the tables, hooting and hollering. A chubby girl, who looked like she was pushing the limit on what was an acceptable age to be crawling through the tubes, bounded off the bottom of one of the slides and charged across to a table with appropriately obese adults. A little girl in a striped dress stared at what Robert could only assume was her twin sister, looking back at her from just within the entrance of the structure. The twin was singing some sort of eerie, tuneless lullaby. The girl outside was so preoccupied by her sister's song, she was nearly bowled over by the chubby girl as she darted back, mouthful of chicken nuggets. Robert shook his head. It was amazing. The places he found himself since having a kid. Under any other circumstance, wading into the stink and noise of such a place would have been about as appealing to him as a back-alley vasectomy. But if it made Lily happy, somehow, it transcended the part of his brain that cared about himself. Robert sat so he was facing the play area and slid the cardboard box containing Lily's kids' meal, complete with small plastic toy, across from him. He knew it would have to have been a fool's errand to try and get the girl to eat before playing, but if he arranged her meal, a cheeseburger, fries, and an apple juice, just so, she would return like a carrier pigeon every so often to take a bite. A sudden vibration issued from his pocket. Robert pulled out his cell phone and groaned at what greeted him. It was a message from his ex-wife, Nicole. "When are you dropping Lily off? Jeff wanted to see her before he goes into work tonight." "Jeff. Fucking Jeff," Robert grumbled under his breath. When Nicole had dropped the news to Robert that her new guy, Jeff, would be moving in with her and Lily, it made Robert want to scream. It wasn't Nicole dating again after their divorce that bothered him. In fact, in that regard, Robert felt sorry for the chap. Nicole had been a hard person to live with. No, what really hurt about the whole situation was that, in terms of day-to-day life, Jeff was now effectively Lily's father. Robert's anger began to spike. His fingers flew across the screen. "I don't really give a fuck what Jeff wants. I'll bring her home when I'm ready to." Robert looked at his reply for several seconds, his thumb hanging like a guillotine over the send button. Before he could blast his nasty response towards the nearest cell tower, something caught his attention. Lily was calling for him. One of the true miracles of parenthood, Robert discovered, was the almost superhero-like ability to hear your child call out to you. It didn't matter if it was coming from a nightmarish structure filled with the lunatic glee of a dozen other children who, by all accounts, sounded almost identical to each other. Some corner of the parental brain could pull apart the audible layers and pick out that solitary voice as if it was the only sound in existence. Lily, a cherub's grin splitting her tiny face, waved energetically from a clear plastic bubble protruding like a tumor from the side of the Playland. The observation window, which was easily 15 feet off the ground and larger than the portholes, peppered throughout, was a hot spot for the tiny people skittering around within. Robert laughed, as honest a response as he had ever had, and waved back at his daughter. Apparently satisfied that her world still existed below, she ducked away, her rainbow-colored socks waving comically behind her before she was gone. God, I love that kid. He looked down at the unsent message and blew out a sigh, lost to the din around him before slowly erasing it. Robert stared at the blank screen, shook his head, and typed, "I'll have her home soon." It was a fun weekend. With Nicole placated, Robert plopped his phone down on the table and eyed his daughter's food. A pile of fries, a grease-soaked gravity that would give the tug of a black hole a run for its money, was too much to resist. He snatched one of the golden sticks from its paper sleeve and quickly gobbled it down. Heaven. "Daddy, Daddy!" Lily came sprinting over to the table. "There's a boy in there!" She momentarily paused as she breathlessly took a bite of her burger. "He's crying." Robert laughed. "Oh no, why?" Lily looked back at the Playland. Her pigtails bobbed through the air. "He said there's a monster in there." Robert leaned across the table and rested his hand on his daughter's slender shoulder. The little girl radiated heat, a tiny engine running at full capacity. "What? Not a monster?" "Yeah, a monster!" She nodded excitedly. He laughed again and rubbed Lily's head. "I'm sure he's just playing, honey." She seemed to weigh this reply before finding it to be adequate. With the update on the crying boy delivered, she inhaled 2 French fries, a second bite of burger, and a swallow of juice before tearing back across the padded floor. She dodged the rowdy neon boys, dove into one of the openings along the base of the structure, and vanished from sight. Robert resisted the urge to reach across the table and devour the rest of Lily's food. He tried to connect to the building's Wi-Fi, but the signal was spotty at best. After several attempts, he was granted access. Robert had a whole suite of game apps on his phone. Nothing too complicated, just simple time killers, something he was eager to do in that moment. As he waded through an ad for a better, more expensive game, he became vaguely aware of one of the parents, a woman in beige capris, peeling away from the viewing area and approaching the Playland. "Zachary, is that you crying?" the woman asked, her voice not quite loud enough to compete with the parade of noise streaming from within the tangle of plastic and steel. A small boy, all tears and snot, burst from the end of one of the 2 slides. "He looked at me," he squealed as his mother scooped him off the foam-matted floor surrounding the Playland. Robert was mildly amused by the boy's hysterics. He always felt like his parenting skills were lacking, until he saw how messed up other people's children were. He returned his attention back to the screen and began sliding his thumb across its surface to get a series of colored columns to line up before time ran out. Okay. A distant rumble pulled Robert away from his phone. He stretched his arms, slipped his cell phone into his pocket, and looked around. Outside, the clear blue sky had been taken over by a collection of storm clouds. They extended, pulled dirty cotton as far as he could see. A slight patter of rain was already hitting the glass. Dozens of tiny specks of water appeared like freckles on the panes. Another deep, bass-filled boom of far-off thunder echoed through the sky. Not only had he been oblivious to the change in weather, but he had also apparently missed what was happening directly around him as well. The tables, which had previously housed the tired-looking parents, were all empty. Various cups and used food wrappers, crumpled and encrusted with mustard and finely diced onions, cluttered the tabletops. A single kid's meal box was overturned on the padded floor. The restaurant's mascot, a furry creature who loved hamburgers, stared at Robert from the side of the cardboard. He stood up, his back popping, and noticed Lily's food still sat across from him. The cheeseburger, minus the 2 bites she had taken earlier, remained otherwise untouched. A fly wandered lazily across the bun landscape. "Damn it, Lily." He shook his head, shooing the insect away. His knee-jerk reaction was to scold the child, but then he realized he was the one to blame. Instead of making sure she ate her dinner, he'd been on his phone. Robert scooped up the wasted food and placed it on the plastic tray before walking over to one of the trash cans and dumping it in. "As long as you don't tell your mom you didn't eat dinner, we'll be okay." The Playland was eerily quiet. Robert thought the place must be downright terrifying when the lights were off. He moved over to the purple cube with the hole cut into it and said, "Come on, Lily, we have to get you home." Her running shoes still sat where they fell. They looked comically small to him in that moment, like no human could be so tiny to wear such things. Lily had such a big personality, Robert sometimes forgot how little his daughter was. He bent over and collected them before turning his attention to the entrance. "Lily, your mom is not going to be happy with Daddy if I don't get you home, honey." Robert drummed his fingers on the lip of the plastic rim entrance to the Playland. He leaned into the opening and listened for any sound at all. "Lily?" A terrible thought came to him. What if someone's taken her? He shook his head to dislodge the idea from his brain, but a growing level of unease, like some dank fungus flourishing in the darkest of places, kept the horrible possibility present in his mind. "Lily, this isn't funny, baby." Robert stuck his head further into the hole, and his voice immediately echoed back at him, a dozen clones parroting his words. Panic, the likes of which Robert wouldn't have thought possible, certainly not so quickly anyway, raced through his body. He yelled again into the structure. Nothing. Not even the smallest knock or scratch to indicate there was anything alive in the Playland at all. He stood back up, spinning in a half circle, expecting to see the child hiding in a corner, hand over mouth, giggling at how good a trick she had just played on Daddy. But the room was empty. In fact, in that moment, it felt more than just empty. It was abandoned. A mausoleum made of colorful materials and cartoon decals. Even the stench of food was absent. Robert blasted through the glass door leading back to the main seating area of the restaurant and darted toward the counter. He knocked into a group of teens mixing various flavors of soda into their cups at the fountain machine. A nasty comment, followed by snickering, was left in his wake. Robert barely heard them, though, as his own breathing, short and rapid, filled his ears. He felt like maybe he was having a heart attack. Why can't I breathe? A girl, not yet 17, if her acne-covered cheeks were to be believed, smiled at Robert from the other side of the counter. The plastic badge on her chest revealed her name to be Edith, a name completely at odds with her apparent young age. "Welcome to my daughter," he cut her off. The unexpected response caused Edith to rock back slightly on her heels, like her voice had physically pushed her. Her eyes darted for a second in search of what Robert couldn't say. "Is everything okay, sir?" "No!" He could barely get the word out. "I can't find her! My daughter!" Edith visibly swallowed and glanced around a second time. Where was she, sir?" "She was in the Playland. We were eating, and I looked down at my phone for a minute." Only it hadn't been a minute. His attention had been off his daughter for longer than that. "And now I can't find her!" He was aware he was twisting and bending Lily's shoes as he spoke. Edith, eyes wide, called over a young man wearing a black shirt. Robert realized this fellow had been the source of her wandering gaze. His name tag identified him as Timothy, and that he held the coveted position of shift manager. She relayed the message. "Have you checked the bathrooms?" Timothy said. His tone hovered between concerned and annoyed. It was as if he wanted Lily to be found so he wouldn't have to fill out the paperwork that would almost certainly be involved with the lost child. Robert flushed with embarrassment. He hadn't thought of the bathrooms, although he doubted Lily would venture off to the restroom without informing him. She was constantly trying to prove how much of a big girl she'd become. It wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility that she would attempt the trek alone. "No, I haven't." "Okay, Edith, go check the ladies' room for Lily," Robert blurted out. "Go check for Lily." Edith hurried around the counter and headed for the bathrooms. The shift manager, his dark hair stiff with too much product, leaned across the counter and smiled at Robert. "No worries, sir. Well, I'm sure your little one's in the building. Did you check the Playland thoroughly? We've had kids play tricks on their parents before." He rolled his eyes and made a clucking sound with his tongue. "They don't understand how upset it makes their folks, but kids will be kids. Maybe go take another look. If she isn't there or in the restroom, which she probably is, we can check the cameras." The cameras? Jesus Christ, this can't be happening. Robert nodded. His body had grown numb. As he rushed back to the glass door leading to the Playland, a single thought corkscrewed through his mind. She's already gone. He had visions of a car, probably something nondescript, a Toyota Camry or a Honda Accord, the kind of vehicle nobody looked twice at, driving farther and farther away from him. A car that had his daughter in it. "Don't fucking think that," he scolded himself, but he couldn't help it. His mind had become something else, a gray matter, Mr. Hyde, tormenting him with visions of his baby in the most horrible possible places. "Lily!" he yelled as soon as he cleared the door. Nothing. The room was still empty. Robert wasn't sure if he would have felt better or worse with an audience. One thing was certain, he wanted to cry, but felt like it wasn't the time for such a thing. As if the act of crying would make the nightmare a reality, as if it would cement his daughter's fate. The Playland, looming like a many-armed leviathan, seemed to grow and breathe as Robert rushed towards the black maw, yawning open along the front. "Lily! Please, Daddy's not playing anymore. If you're in there, it's time to come out." She's not in there. She's crying in the back seat of a forgettable car heading towards the highway as a man with dead eyes tells her to shut up before he gives her something to really cry about. Robert let out a frustrated groan at the thought. A small, playful laugh, born from deep inside the plastic innards of the Playland, bounced off the tubular walls until it reached the circular hole Robert leaned into. It was Lily. He was sure of it. A great wash of relief flooded through him, a deluge he was happy to drown in. "Lily!" he shouted, dropping her shoes and squeezing through the hole. Damp heat greeted him upon entering the structure. It was easily 10 degrees warmer within the confines of the plastic tubing. How can kids stand it in here? He wondered. Besides the temperature, which was already causing small beads of sweat to burst forth along his hairline, there was also the stench. a pungent aroma of dirty feet and filthy clothing mixed with an underlying stink of vomit. Robert gagged with the first lungful of air he sucked in. It didn't take long to realize he was far too large to be navigating the thing with any sort of ease. The plastic underneath him was hard and unforgiving. Each crawling slide forward sent a rake of fiery pain through his knees. The sides of his jacket brushed against the interior of the tube, and his head grazed the ceiling. "Lily, come out now!" He stared into the length of pipe before him, the shaft ending at a 90-degree turn a half-dozen feet ahead. "I'm stuck!" Her voice wafted down from somewhere above. Robert sighed. "All right, honey, I'm coming." A giggle, like the jingle of a delicate bell, was the only reply. The bend was too sharp and narrow for Robert to make the turn on his hands and knees. Shifting to his side, he formed his body around the curve, then pulled himself past it. He was dismayed to find the tunnel on the other side much tighter than what he was already used to. The only way to continue on was to worm his way through until it opened back up. A surge of primal panic filled him as he felt the pressing hardness of the colorful tube on all sides. He tried to reassure himself that even if he became stuck, he was hardly in any unreachable location. Still, the sensation of being pinned was enough to make his limbs jittery and his heart race. Just as he was sure the tube was starting to constrict around him, slowly crushing him like a plastic boa constrictor, he shimmied over a lip and fell into a small room. The walls of the space, approximately the size of a compact car, were bright yellow. The ceiling just high enough that he could rise to a crouch. His knees popped angrily as he took up the new position. Decals decorated every available space. They depicted a gaggle of cartoony-looking pirates, a mess of peg legs, eye patches, and shoulder-mounted parrots, chasing a dashing buccaneer. 3 nautical steering wheels jutted from the wall like perfectly round mushrooms. The wheels were made of the same yellow plastic, but the grips had been permanently stained black from countless dirty hands groping them. An upended box of French fries stood in the corner. The golden sticks had turned dark, almost gray. Lines of green mold sprouted from them. The food had to have been there for days. Don't they ever clean this place? He wondered how many children poured through the Playland on a daily basis. What horrific things must grow in the nooks and crannies, just waiting for small hands to rub across them. The idea that even after the restaurant closed, there was a plethora of life continuing to expand, fester within the place made him nauseous. Robert put aside the thought and continued to survey the area. On the far end of the room was a series of indented rungs, which led up through an opening in the ceiling. If he was picturing the Playland correctly in his mind, the ladder would ascend upwards, bringing him to the plastic observation bubble Lily had waved from earlier. He started making his way forward when a sudden dizzy spell caused him to stop. The heat was starting to get to him. It made his head spin. His thoughts took on a molten, sticky quality, and he felt like reality was pulling away, as if beyond the yellow walls of the room he crouched inside, the world had begun peeling back like the layers of an onion, revealing something new and terrifying underneath. He rubbed the palms of his hand across his forehead. He came back to soak with sweat. He had read a book once, a war story, and in it, the protagonist had been locked in a metal box in the middle of a field on a hot day. The narrator had described the situation as being as close to hell as a person could be while in the land of the living. As Robert blinked away the heat spots filling his vision, he thought it was very likely the author had never crawled through a Playland before. A shrill beep issued from his pocket, causing him to jump, which resulted in a painful bump on the head when he hit the ceiling. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled free his cell phone. Lit across the screen was a message from Nicole. "Where are you? I expected Lily home an hour ago. Is everything okay?" "Great," Robert sighed. Nicole already thought him incompetent as a father, and now he might have to reveal that he had lost their child at a fast food restaurant. "We got sidetracked, having too much fun. We'll be there soon." His reply grew fuzzy in his sight, and the salt from his sweat stung his eyes. He shoved the phone back in his pocket. Somewhere around above him, there came a knock. It was sudden and light, just faint enough that when Robert leaned forward, he was convinced it hadn't been there at all. But then it came again, this time with more conviction. "Lily, are you still stuck? Daddy's having some trouble here. It'd be really helpful if you could just come back out." Robert fell absolutely still in anticipation of a reply as soon as the words left his lips. A soft whispering sound began to waft through the plastic innards of the structure. It was almost melodic, but Robert couldn't make out any clear words. Even the source was hard to identify. It might have been a child, or it might have been a loud radio from a car pulling in the drive-thru. "Is that you, Lily? Where are you?" The girl didn't answer, not even a giggle. Instead, he heard a wild clatter of small hands and feet scurrying over plastic. Oh, so much for being stuck. Something about the sound paralyzed Robert. It was frenzied, crazed, the kind of racket an animal would make, a raccoon breaking free from a trap, not a little girl. He hurried over to the hole in the ceiling and stood up. Robert imagined the ladder must be quite the obstacle for the Playland's usual population, but for him, it only went up to his shoulders. Standing allowed his head to pop through to the next level. "Lily, enough's enough. Come with me right now." Nothing. A long section of purple pipe stretched off in both directions. To the left, he could see the edges of the clear plastic bubble Lily had waved from. The bright fluorescent lights of the room beyond blared through the membrane, supercharging the violet hues of the plastic. To the right, the tube broke off into three paths: an oblong-shaped blue tube, an orange shaft, and a green tunnel with pink polka dots. He thought at least two of them led to slides. "Lily?" Sweat dribbled down his face. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stand to be within the confines of the Playland. "Daddy?" Lily's voice, barely above a whisper, wafted around him. "Where are you, baby?" Robert hefted himself up through the hole in the depths of the green tunnel. He caught a glimpse of movement and crawled forward. A pair of feet wiggled away, feet wrapped in rainbow socks. "Lily, come here right now!" Robert launched himself into the green tube with the pink polka dots. She was playing with him. She wasn't stuck at all. Anger began to flare inside of him. "You are in big trouble, Missy!" The thick miasma of funk filling the air made him gag as he took in breath, sucking lungs full of air. He could feel the entire structure shift and sway under his weight. "Come get me," Lily whispered again. Robert paused in his forward crawl. Something was not right about his daughter's voice. He couldn't place it exactly, but it sounded fake. Like an impersonation. Close to the real thing, but not quite. A slight stretching of words, a barely perceived stutter. "That's not Lily." It was a ridiculous thought, of course, and one Robert was quick to dismiss. He was stressed out, overtaxed. The heat was playing with his mind. The acoustics of the Playland distorted Lily's words. There was another burst of movement. This time it seemed to emanate from the exterior of the Playland's walls. An image of a huge spider scaling the plastic innards of the place flashed through his mind before he could stop it. What was that? "Lily?" Robert held his breath, waiting for a reply. His heart pounded furiously in his chest. And just when he thought that there would be nothing, a delicate voice began to sing. "The sweet little children all like to play. The sweet little children all like to stay. The sweet little children will live forever this day." The tone abruptly changed to something deeper, but still, "Lily, we are hungry and must be fed. We are tired and want to sleep in their bed. We will take their faces and go in their stead." The sweat coating his skin turned cold, sending a shiver across his body. He realized he had heard the tune before. The twin girls. The one inside the Playland had been looking at her sister, singing the same rhyme. "Honey?" He found himself crawling forward once again, but this time at a much slower pace. The green tunnel looped around a wide bend before joining the orange shaft. As Robert continued forward, he noticed deep gouges and scratches in the plastic. Little hard orange curls stood out along the floor like somebody had taken 4 knives and dragged them across the walls. What could do this? He had no answers to his question. "You're getting so close, Daddy." Robert looked ahead, and there she was, right in front of him, scurrying away. Her rainbow socks, loose and saggy on her feet, bounced and bobbed as she crawled. The girl rocketed from the orange shaft back into the purple tube and continued toward the observation bubble. "Lily, stop!" Robert shot forward, snatching at her, his fingers gripping the floppy toe of one sock, pulling it free. Just before she disappeared around the corner of the bubble, he saw the newly exposed appendage. Instead of a child's small, delicate foot, the limb was wrinkled and splotchy. Slowly, Robert crawled along until he was fully bathed in the light of the clear bubble. Ahead of him, he could see the huddled form of his daughter, where the tube terminated into a dead end. His breath came in ragged, whistling bursts as he stared at the child. She sat hunched, her face hidden behind her hair. Lily? Movement through the observation dome pulled him away from the child. It was the shift manager, Timothy, entering through the glass door in the room. The man walked with a cocky swagger which affected his entire body, except for his stiff hair. Behind him came Edith. The young woman smiled proudly, and next to her, gripping the cashier's hand, was Lily. The little girl had a strip of toilet paper hanging out of the side of her pants. Lily's eyes lit up when she noticed Robert inside the Playland. She waved and laughed, her small finger pointing. She couldn't hear what she said, but her words drew the attention of the two employees. Edith appeared to chuckle at the sight of a grown man wedged inside the children's playplace, while Timothy rolled his eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, Robert returned his attention to the child that he had been chasing. His mind suddenly made connections he had no idea existed until that moment. The twins. The little boy crying about a monster trying to take him. A monster that looked just like him. And of course, the lullaby. Robert. The voice coming from the thing before him was much deeper than it had been the other time it spoke, and with a growing fountain of horror filling his body with icy terror. He saw why. It no longer looked like Lily. In fact, it was not a child at all. In the purple haze piercing the plastic of the Playland, the thing he had been pursuing now looked exactly like him. Robert tried to back away, but it was too fast. It grabbed him and it pulled him away from the observation bubble. Away from Lily. Away from the light. They called him the Crucifix Killer. For weeks straight, the airwaves were saturated with stories of his capture. The boogeyman vanquished at last. I'd personally found the title insensitive in light of his crimes, but it undeniably gave the public a quiet thrill, being able to target their fears onto something tangible. A name to the otherwise faceless villain in the shadows of our safe suburban neighborhoods. An unearthly creature. Stalking the night, carving crosses into the bodies of his prey. In truth, the Crucifix Killer was a regular man in his 50s, Jedediah Reynolds of Jackson, Florida. Over 30 years, Mr. Reynolds had amassed dozens of murders across the country, all linked by their gruesome, uniform nature. The vast majority of his victims were men, mostly Caucasian, in the 25 to 60 age range, but he did deviate on occasion. There was one woman in particular, a beloved mother and active church member in Wisconsin, whose murder had garnered a great deal of coverage. More so than most of the other victims, later attributed to Jedediah. For a while, local media outlets were clogged up with the gory details of his crimes. They pushed the limits of censorship, painting pictures pulled straight from a pulp fiction novel. He started with the throat. First a piano wire, then a knife in his later years. Once he'd overpowered his victim, he'd cut or claw out the eyes, then place them in his target's mouth. He finished with his signature cross, large and ragged, sliced deep into the chest after death. I probably wouldn't have taken note of any of it, if I'm being honest. I've never much cared for shock stories or true crime. Unfortunately, I was forced to pay attention when the Crucifix Killer murdered my father. My dad had been the last victim before Reynolds was caught. The entire event was broadcast on the evening news, though it hadn't been all that exciting to watch. An anonymous tip and some CCTV footage managed to close the case in a matter of days, but nothing else had come close in 3 decades. Reynolds hadn't even put up a fight upon arrest. If anything, he looked relieved. Eyes cast down, tired. His withdrawn demeanor and fondness towards religious symbolism had people speculating A devil made me do it defense in court. Just more fodder for the local bored housewives. The detective on the case advised against me speaking to my father's killer. Told me that Jed wasn't being particularly forthcoming anyway, and I was risking my mental health by potentially exposing myself to everything the man had done, which certainly wasn't a reach. Most people weren't mentally prepared for the reality of facing the murderer of a loved one. But from the moment I had been informed of my father's death, all I could think about was confronting this man. I needed to know why. Why did someone like my dad have to die? Now, growing up, my father had been the only one there for me, and even now, no one loved or supported me in the way that he did. He was always encouraging me, doting on me, and when my mom left us, he loved me twice as hard. My father was a good, gentle man. He was kind to everyone and didn't deserve such a heartbreaking fate. He'd been the sole person to truly believe me through all my ups and downs, and now he was gone. All I had in his stead was righteous fury and the need for answers. "Katie Moore," the receptionist called, rousing me from my web of thoughts that I'd spun while waiting to enter the visiting center. "Here," I said, like she was taking roll call, and a flustered-looking woman with a clipboard buzzed me in. They made me leave my cell phone in the lobby, then sent me through a metal detector that led to a drab, chilly hallway. The atmosphere changed as they ushered me through the door to the visitor's room. A dismal, barren space full of miserable people, some in chains, some free. They spoke in little clusters, forced on one another and oblivious to the tears and hushed arguments at the table around them. "Take a seat," one of the guards said, gesturing to a table in the corner. I looked around at his colleagues to find them distracted and uninterested, staring into space. I wondered what it must be like to grow up so accustomed to being surrounded by murderers that an individual couldn't even be bothered to keep an eye on what was happening around them. Burnout or apathy, or both. The man walked away and my nerves spiked that much more. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but it only made my blood pressure rise. Seconds ticked by, and a pit formed in my stomach as I questioned my choice to come here for the first time. Was I really ready for this? Would it actually make any sort of positive difference? Maybe I was better off not knowing. It wasn't too late to back out. I could just get up and leave. But the doors to the left of me screeched open, and my chance was gone. A guard at either side. They marched him in. Jedediah Reynolds, the man whose face had been plastered on every television channel for the past 2 weeks. The last person to see my father alive. His head was down, eyes averted as they led him to my table, but for the jangle of his chains, the man didn't make a sound, allowing himself to be directed without protest. I watched as the guards secured his cuffs to the table, giving him just enough room for movement, but not enough for the illusion of freedom. One of the guards mumbled something about no touching, and then let us be, disappearing behind the heavy doors once more. And then it was just the two of us. Though the room was filled with people, I felt alone, staring at this man in person. He hadn't seemed real until now. Everything up until this moment had been a mere fantasy. Part of me had envisioned storming in, demanding the truth, shaking this man to his core. I wanted to know that I wasn't afraid of him, that he had to answer to me for his transgressions like I was the angel of justice herself. But now that he was across from me, hunched over and silent, I couldn't muster up the words myself. We sat like that for a while, unspeaking. Bits and pieces of conversations around us drifted to me. People arguing, people crying. I swallowed and glanced back at Reynolds. He still hadn't even looked at me. "Do you know who I am?" I finally asked. Reynolds didn't reply. I stared at him for a while, wondering if he could feel my eyes on him. If I stared long enough, would something crack? But he remained unchanged, head down as if in prayer, so I continued. "You killed my father," I said, searching for a reaction, but there was none. He didn't flinch or move, he just kept staring down. I'm sorry for that, he said. And I startled at the sudden reply. His voice was lower and more raspy than I'd imagined, older than his years, exhausted like he never slept. Then why did you do it? I asked after a moment, clearing my throat as I caught the first quiver in my words. I don't expect you to understand, he murmured in that same tired tone. I'm very sorry for the suffering this has caused you. I wish I could take your pain away. He was all I had, you know that? I said, through gritted teeth, my eyes burning. I'm alone now because of you. Another long silence stretched between us. Finally, Jedediah lifted his head, allowed me to see his creased face, his mournful eyes, the heavy bags that hung beneath them. I wish it could have been another way, he began. I know you can't possibly understand, but... His expression shifted as he focused on my face, startled, like he'd seen a ghost. I must have made the same expression, caught off guard by the change in his posture. It was like seeing an old rock come to life out of nowhere. Tears filled his eyes, and he smiled. He actually smiled. It's you, he said, his voice shaking. I've never gotten to actually meet one of you before. What? I snapped, glancing around at the guards, who were paying us no mind. What are you talking about? Jedediah shook his head and lowered it again. Praise God, he told me. To be able to see you, it's the one blessing to come out of this burden. He caught my gaze and held it. Please, he whispered. With unnerving desperation, can I take your hand? I jerked away as if he'd tried to grab me. What? No! He stared for a moment, his smile fading, and slowly nodded in acceptance. You're right, I'm sorry. The hell are you going on about? I demanded. How can you sit here and smile at me after murdering my father? Reynolds grew somber again, then stared down at his clasped hands. Several seconds passed, and I wondered if perhaps the man was done talking. Then I could tell you the truth. I owe you that much. He looked up once more. And even if you do, you probably won't want to hear it. The urge to strike the man rose in my chest. Why was I listening to the ramblings of some psychopath? Why had I let him rile me up in this way? He was playing with me, playing me into his delusions, but even so, I couldn't fight the nagging fear that if I turned away from him now, I'd forever be haunted by the mystery. This could be the only way I'd ever learn the truth. I swallowed hard. Just tell me. Reynolds looked at me for a long moment, searching my face as if looking for cracks in my resolve. Finally, he closed his eyes and nodded. I learned as a young man that I have a gift, he told me. Truthfully, it's more like a curse. Such a cliche, I thought, but I felt like I knew where this might be going. See, I've come to understand that I was put on this earth for an important reason. Through God's will, I have the power to cleanse the land of evil. I stared at him without reaction. Maybe I'd seen too many cop shows, but it didn't surprise me. This guy thought he was special. The things he did were justified. It reminded me of something my father used to say regarding sick people who thought they were doing the Lord's work. Taking out the evildoers, He said that they believed they were the hand of God, doing his bidding on earth. It was the sort of darkness that could come out of religion and blind faith. Just a bunch of mentally ill folks, according to my dad. So he'd never believed in the supernatural. So my father had a demon in him, huh? I asked coldly. No, Jedediah said. It's not like that. Ever since I was a teenager, He hesitated and looked around. The first time he'd appeared nervous since he entered the room. It was like all the solemn, broken man from before had just vanished. I know it's difficult to believe, but I swear it. When I touch a person, sometimes I see things. Things that haven't happened yet. I stared him down, unblinking, and he shifted beneath my gaze. I see things they're going to do. Just say it, I said, sick of the dancing around. If I touch the skin of a future murderer, I could see the crimes they have yet to commit. Jedediah searched my eyes, perhaps searching for a desired reaction. All those people, he murmured. I didn't want to kill them, but if I hadn't, they would have taken innocent lives. My expression didn't change, still incredulous and angry, but inwardly. I considered the pattern of victims that were connected with Reynolds. I couldn't remember them all, but quite a few did seem to have an unsavory air about them. Wife-beater, corrupted cop, escalating pedophile, embittered hermit who stalked women. Perhaps most damning of all, the mother in Wisconsin. Tributes to her had stopped completely after it was discovered that she'd been slowly poisoning her children and her husband for the insurance money. That didn't mean anything, of course. Jedediah could have found their information online, noticed a pattern, might have even tracked people down based on arrest records or internet forums. I mean, after all, though the ones who came to mind may not have been great people, there were plenty of others who'd been stand-up citizens. Like my father. You think I'm crazy? Reynolds said, pulling me from my thoughts. I understand, I do. I thought I was for a long time until it started to happen. I'd see the murders, and then I'd discover they'd happen. Just like I'd seen in my vision. Why not go to the police, then? I asked, leaning into my skepticism in an effort to ground myself. I tried to, I swear it, Jedediah said, pleaded. There was nothing I could say to make them follow through. Without a crime, what was there to investigate? I realized that most of these people wouldn't be punished until the killing had already occurred. He gazed down at his hands again. So I did what I had to do. I considered what the man had said for a long time. It was insane to buy into such a story. I mean, this person was crazy. I was only hurting myself by indulging his fantasies. However, I couldn't help but linger on my next question. Would asking it be the same as accepting what Jedediah was telling me? Despite my hesitation, we both knew it was coming. I saw a reluctance on Jedediah's face before I'd even spoken. So what about my dad? I finally asked. What was he going to do? Now it was Jedediah's turn to turn out the silence. He locked his gaze on the table, refusing to look at me, which only made me angrier. Tell me, I snapped. If I was going to put myself in this position by asking, he damn well was going to give me an answer. Jed raised his head again, and my gut clenched as I saw that he was crying. The words stopped in my throat. Was this remorse? Did he regret what he had done? Now that he was forced to face the victim's family, I mean, was it fear of consequences finally setting in? Realization that perhaps he hadn't been spiritually guided to killing these people after all? More delusions? I didn't know how to proceed. But Jed did. It was you. I stared at the man. I felt my heart rate increase. I'm so sorry, child. I had no idea. No idea it was his own daughter. Something twisted inside of me. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but we both knew. You don't expect me to believe something that ridiculous, I said, as some distant part of me hoped that he'd tell me that I was right. I didn't believe him. I told myself over and over that I didn't believe him, yet I couldn't stop the feeling of my insides twisting. There was no way he wasn't lying. About all of it. The special ability, the visions, the murder itself. I could have easily brushed it off as more crazy ramblings, but some distant part of me couldn't shake Jed's words. Was it his sincerity? My own need to make sense of the nonsensical? It wasn't possible. Even if I was willing to buy into the supernatural crap, my father loved me more than anything. I'm sorry, Jed said again. He seemed like such a good man, but when he shook my hand, I saw it. Him, holding a pillow over the face of a girl crying as she fought against him. Once she'd stopped moving, he lifted the pillow again and I saw her face. Your face. Tears glistened in his eyes as Jedediah struggled to finish the story. You were so young. I saw your lifeless eyes, your entire future snuffed out, and I had to stop him. Though I inwardly screamed that these were lies, I couldn't stop myself from imagining my father doing such a thing. I thought about the hands that lovingly brushed my hair, that wiped away my tears and comforted me when I was sick. The idea of those same hands turning on me, ending my life. My stomach twisted again, battling a swill of nausea and fury. It was much harder than I expected to assure myself that none of this could be true. I hated Jedediah that much more for planting that uncertainty inside of me. I was stupid to come here, I said, standing sharply. Maybe it had been the grief that had me thinking I could find some sort of closure in this. The loss had hit me too hard, and I convinced myself that there was an answer that could take away some of the damage. But now, I was finding clarity, and I knew staying here a second longer was only going to make things that much worse for me. No, wait a moment, Jedediah said. Don't go yet. Please don't go. I've never been able to meet any of the people I've saved. Please just stay for a moment longer. I hope you live a long, long life, I told him coldly. Enjoy prison. Wait, please, he called. As I turned to leave, his fingers clasped around my wrist and pulled me back. My heart leapt into my throat and I whipped around, curses on my tongue. However, the rage leaked out of me the moment I saw Jedediah's face. The gaze between us was intense, enough to make me shudder, but I didn't look away. I focused on Jedediah's expression, the peculiar way his features had twisted. And as I watched the look of shock in his eyes shift to violent panic, something shifted within me as well. My heart began to flutter, exhilarated. I couldn't help the smile that stretched across my lips. Old Jed was telling the truth. You, Jed whispered, eyes wide and horrified. My pulse raced, excitement danced through my veins to think that something like this could be real. I beamed at Jedediah, then leaned closer so no one else could hear us. You know, I honestly didn't think he had the guts to go through with it. I murmured, sure he was afraid of what I might do someday. But I've always been Daddy's little girl. It hurts a little to think that he was actually capable of killing me. Jedediah shook his head, his voice tight and raspy. You're a monster, I smirked. Are you sure? I asked. Or am I doing God's work? Hey, no touching, a guard belatedly shouted, and I jerked my arm from Jed's shaking hand. Thank you, though, Jedediah, I said softly, for saving me. And with that, I turned and walked away from him. Behind me, his screams echoed through the cement room. Don't let her leave, he shouted. You have to stop her! Oh God, what have I done? The guards jumped to life at the disturbance, wrestling Jed to the ground amidst his crazed rantings. Stepping out of the prison doors, I turned my head to the sky. The sun was shining bright. The day was full of promise. Times have been tough for me, so I haven't quite updated everything as I would have liked in the past couple of months. I'm finally getting back to the swing of things as my life continues to normalize. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me, and honestly, I see all of your comments and your support as I've been talking about what's been happening with me, and I want to tell you all thank you so much for that, because it's been rough. And seeing your support has been life-saving. So thank you all so much for it. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. That includes everybody who's been waiting for me to update my Patreon, and I thank you all so much for being so patient with me. But especially, I want to give a thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Chance Burnett, Kraus, Tristain Pelton, AcidSystem, Adam Gerecke, Aeryn Stormcrow, Aika Limchoc, Amber Clark, Angelus, Atomarus, Bastion Beefcake, Blue the Enigma, Braden Morris, Broken Beast 320, Captain Scurvy, Caspian, Shelly J, Corey Kenshin, Cronut 509, Crusader Chocobo, Cryptic Nightmares, Curse Pox Primarch, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Daniel Polson, Darth Miver, deleted account, Dirt Diver 030, M, Esteban, Fester's Lampshade, Freddy Krueger, Gorag Trimagazine, Grand Moth the Milky, Hades' Nephew, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Harley, Himbo Jerry, Horseman Sect Time, Insanity Gamer X, Jay Cairns, Jesus Corneo, Jordan Humble, Justin LaFontaine, Kaylee Ambrose, Kiri the Sloth, Crazy Kid, Cryolinian, Lambda M98, Lisa Cottrell, Little Crow, Lord Life's Best, Lupita Galvin, Love You Eminem, Matt Bach, Melted Lake, Michael Allen Jr. Bashirs, Mike, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Nate Cull, Nico Kayo, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Rob Like Sharp Things, Samahai, Sashi Suzaku, Seclude, Stricken, Tali Sue, Tater Chip, That Creepy Chick, The Ginger Bros, Turtle Man, Voice of Sand, William King, Xavier and Cheyenne, Yargul, and Zachary Graphius. If you would like to join this list of names that I horribly mispronounce, then please head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, or you can always check out the names in the description down below, and I appreciate it infinitely. So thank you all on Patreon, thank you all so much, and to everyone, sweet dreams.